Hey everyone and welcome to another video. Today we're coming at you live with a Syndra guide, a much requested guide alongside Cassidin, which is coming, don't worry guys. Today, join with me, we've got Tim, or Mysterious, my fellow sidekick inside the Midland Academy, one of the other Midland Academy coaches, all the way from Europe. Down below, we've got some juicy pictures of his OPGG. He's absolutely smurfing it around roughly Grandmaster in EU West. This is his last 15 or so games of Syndra. He's killing it. Tim's put a lot of work into this guide. So if it's not up to your guys' standards, shit on Tim, not me.
Yeah, please get me.
Blame it on him. No, but Tim's put a lot of work into this. So Tim, we're going to start with why Syndra. So why Syndra? Walk us through here.
Well, first of all, she's an amazing blind pick and very flexible. She can be played a bit more slow, she can be played a bit more fast, and whenever you pick her in the draft, you will find a good use for her in the game. And even though some drafts can be hard, you can wriggle your way through every single draft and be useful in every single game. Hence is why I really love just picking her whenever I feel like picking her.
And, I'm going to sound like a broken record, or if you're in the Midland Academy, I sound like a broken record. I recommend Syndra to everyone, basically at any rank past Gold 4. It's probably one of the, like you said, one of the most reliable, blind pickable mids in the entire game because of the versatility with your E. So if you like control
Yep.
mages, Syndra is probably right up your alley. Getting straight into it, identity. So Syndra is first and foremost a scaling burst control mage, but with a decent amount of early game. This means we can be flexible in the way we approach the game. There are two kind of styles. So walk us through the scaling style, Tim.
So the scaling style is the style that is most innate with what Xindra's identity is. You play for economy, you play to hit your item spikes, your splinter stacks, and you're extremely, extremely strong in the mid to late game. But with the downside that your early game isn't that strong. It's very good when we are allowed to scale and that we're allowed to hit that level 8, level 9 breakpoint. And from that, we can actually start taking over the game.
I was going
As
to kind
for
of
early,
interject here. Sorry, one thing about
yeah, go ahead.
for me, I've come from a background of old school Syndra. So I want to make it very clear in this guide that Syndra is a very, very different champion to what she used to be. Syndra was that hardcore lane bully, shit on your opponent early, get a lot done, and you didn't really scale as well into the mid game. It's probably completely opposite now, right? Like, especially with
Yeah.
the first strike Syndra and the way the splinter stacks work, Syndra is probably one of the most hyper scaling mid laners in the game, at least top 10 for sure, top 5 to 10. Now, I also was biased. This is where me and you had a bit of a riff at some point. I was very early game focused into with the Aerie. Even after the changes, you were a big fan of the first strike. Look, I
Yeah.
will say that both of them, you still want to take good trades. You still want to get your splinter sacks. But with Aerie, you're probably a little bit more focused on getting a bit more control. It gives you a little bit more adaptability to faster paced games, but you are considerably weaker. Is it around like level, what level is it where first strike out damages Aerie? It's like
Level 8, level 9,
right.
something like that.
So unless you're getting,
So-
a lot done in those first like 9 levels, you're probably just better off with first strike.
yeah, so there's one thing I want to add. So usually I like default to first strike. The only time where I like actively change my setup towards Airy is if I know that I need to be present in the early game. So if I'm playing against an Akshan that wants to perma push into me and I know that there's going to be early game skirmishes, Airy is just going to be generally better and I outskill him anyway because I'm Xindra. So those are the type of lanes that I'm going to take Airy in. And in the lanes that I'm allowed to skill, in the games that I'm allowed to skill, I'm going to take first strike.
And I want to make it very clear here today, guys. I am now, in the church. I'm a disciple of the first strike Syndra. I once wasn't. Now I'm a true believer. But I think I want to make it very clear that I think the first strike scaling style of Syndra is the stock standard. Airy is more of the niche now, where it used to be the other way around. So just something to keep in mind as we go through this guide. So getting straight into runes here. I mean, pretty stock standard first strike page. Is there anything that really you want to expand on here?
Yeah, so I want to expand on the sorcery tree, especially. The first strike tree is pretty straightforward. There's a few options with futures market, biscuits, and stopwatch, but it's usually not really the case. You can always just copy and paste the inspiration tree, and you will be fine. This is just generally the best rune page. But once you go to sorcery, then there's where the most questions come around. I do not like mana flow band on Xindra because I think, I mean, it's not bad at all, but I think there's just better options. First of all, Gathering Storm is really good on Xindra because we skill extremely well with pure AP. And because of Rabadon's dead cap and because of her passive getting her 15% increased ability power, Gathering Storm just kills extremely well. Moreover, you can take Absolute Focus also for that same AP scaling. But I've come to realize that Xindra actually lacks a bit of CDR in her kit. And especially for playing scaling Xindra, and we can get away with not taking the CDR shard and taking Transcendence, we can get, instead of about 20 ability haste, we get to up to 38. And in the mid to late game, it's going to be a massive difference with the uptime of our abilities, especially RE, which will put us in way more favorable positions. So I've actually changed my rune page to this standard rune page every single time whenever I get the chance to skill up and to play scaling Xindra, and it's been working wonders for me. Sometimes you can actually opt in for attack speed chart if you want a bit more control in lane or a bit more lane wave control. But if I can get away with it, CDR shard is extremely nice.
And we're going to be talking about this throughout the guide, but Syndra doesn't really have mana problems if you're hitting your abilities reliably, right? Ever since they changed the passive, you shouldn't really be having mana problems. And if you are going in the early lane, chances are that you're not using the Splinter Sacks properly. You're only going for Q poke or not QW, or like using two abilities at once, or you're just missing a lot of your abilities. So it's a red flag.
Most likely that's one.
Yeah, that's right. So we do still have the class El Clasico Airy page for the Scorch. Obviously, Scorch and Airy kind of go hand in hand, a lot faster paced. I think Cosmic Insight is kind of like a non-negotiable with Syndra. You really do kind of value that flash. You can go Boots, you can go Biscuit. I think with this page, you might even want to be considering Biscuits even higher because you're probably going to be pushing the pace of the lane. I think that's relatively straightforward. And I think, again, attack speed makes sense for Eric because you want to be playing for more lane control. You've also got Secondary Resolve here. What matchups would you be looking to take Secondary Resolve?
So there's certain matchups that poke really heavily or that trade with certain trading patterns that you kind of need Resolve in. Good example, Echo or Fizz. You take Bone Plating into those matchups and your trading patterns get a lot more favorable because there's just going to be that window where the enemy cannot really jump onto you and cannot really trade with you. So you got a few more windows in the lane. For example, another champion can be LeBlanc, who wants to jump in. These champions that want to jump in, bone plating works really well against. But you also got Second Wind. If you play against corrupting potion champions, for example, like Orianna, Victor, that want to push the pace of the lane and contest you with a bit stronger early game, Second Wind actually works pretty well against their poke, and it can help you sustain in the lane pretty well. So you can match their early game strength.
Love it. Moving on to the spicy stuff. So this is where all the controversy is going to start. There's going to be a riot outside your house any moment now. Let's start with the starting items. Makes the most sense. Top left here, we have First Strike and Ares. So let's, I guess, start with the First Strike. We've got Doran's Ring versus Sapphire Crystal Star. Walk us through this one, Tim.
So if you really want to play economy, and if you're playing against a weak early laner, I think if you can start Sapphire Crystal plus Refillable Potion, it's a very greedy but very efficient base, like starting items. Because then your first base is going to be around 750 gold. We can get Lost Chapter, and we can get going from that point in the lane. But if we're playing against a bit stronger early lane champion, for example, an Ahri or like any other
Even
mage,
like a
even like a Victor, yeah, for sure. Then we want to take Doran's Ring because otherwise we're going to be getting outpoked and outpaced in the lane too hard. That means that we got to delay our first base a little bit, but that's still fine. It gives us a bit more early game strength that makes up for our pure scaling rune being First Strike. I quickly want to talk about Tear. Tear is a very good item on Xindra, but not in every situation. The downside of Tear is that it delays our initial power spike and our Lost Chapter power spike. So yes, we can buy Tear, but not in every game. So I like it a lot when the enemy team has a lot of hard engage or like a lot of these assassins, or when we don't really necessarily need this Lost Chapter power spike and that we just want to avoid the lane in general.
But I want to kind of interject here with this one as well, Tim. Like, I think that with Tear, my mindset anyway, and this is where me and you might differ with this, is I feel like I very rarely want to go Tear if I'm going Ludens. I like feel like for me, look, there are games where that is the case, and I think it very much depends on the pace of the game. But for me, anyway, I feel like if I'm left on an island, and I am choosing to play the game slow, and I'm versing squishies, I really, really don't want to delay my Ludens and my Sorks. Like I feel like I personally really, really value my Ludens and my Sorks. But if I'm going Leandris and I know that my one item spike's really not going to be overly impactful as maybe a Luden Sorks, and I'm all playing for 2, 3 items, scaling into the mid to late game, and I'm versing tankier members, I get a lot of value from tier because then I'm gonna be happily going Seraphs as a second item. So look, I think when it comes to this for the average person, I think tier is quite niche. Personally, I would actually prefer if you're gonna start your Syndra journey, don't build tier. Wait till you build that feel for the champion. You start to get confident with your ability usage, and then later down the line, once you've developed mastery, maybe game 30, game 40, game 50, then you can maybe start to dabble around with tier and Leandris to see how that feels. Tier specifically and Seraphs, see how that feels for you. But I don't think it's really like something that you want to start off with anyway, right? Especially since the mana shouldn't really be. It's not really for the mana rat at all, right? It's all for the second item. It's all for the Seraphs and the shielding later on.
Exactly. So with Eri, it's a bit different because with Eri, we're actually looking to pressure the enemy laner. We're actually looking to kill them once in a while as well. So instead of going Lost Chapter first, we actually opt in for Sword Shoes. And this also works because in our runes, we did actually take Mana Flow Band. So we can get away with getting that early magic penetration. And that makes our level 6, level 7, and even level 8 really deadly because of this magic penetration. We can get a lot of kill threat. So we want to shift up the building order a little bit more. To turn back to the first strike page, when do we want to get our boots? Usually after our mythic. So what are the general build type combinations that we want to go for when we're playing Xindra? So in general, you want to go for either Luden's Shadow Flame, which is always just generally very good whenever you're solo AP. But if we're playing against a bit more tanky compositions, we can always go opt in for Liandry's Seraphs or Liandry's Banshees, Sonias. Cosmic Drive is even a very surprisingly good item on Xindra. It gives us a lot of ability power, ability haste, and even move speed. Just generally very nice
You're just
stats.
incredibly squishy with Cosmic Drive.
You're just incredibly squishy, indeed. That's true. And in certain situations, we could even go Rabadons or Void Staff second if needed, but that's only when the situation really asks for it. The main thing that I want to make you understand with this building pattern is that just be open-minded and look at what the game asks you to buy. There's a lot of good options, and even you might be building Liandry's in the wrong type of game, you're still going to be useful. So it's not like if you build the wrong thing, something bad's going to happen. You can still do great things in game. It's just that the flexibility of this build allows you to adapt to every type of situation and just get that slight edge in every game.
And there's two things that I want to quickly talk about here. I've had a lot of people like, wait, what? You can just go straight Sorks on Syndra? And again, this is tying into the mana that you're going to get from your Splinter stacks. Even without Mana Flow Ban, if you're accurate with your ability usage, you're going to be completely fine with mana. Mana isn't really an issue. Ever since the change to the passive, Syndra's not like Victor or an Ari. It is shame that they really, really do need that Lost Chapter. So something to keep in mind. And the second thing is Darkseal here. Tim, you've put Darkseal here. What are your thoughts on Darkseal and Syndra?
Darkseal is good if we can snowball. If we die, or if the enemy has too much threat, I don't like Darkseal because it delays our item spikes. Yeah. I think Darkseal is better in Eri games than in first strike games because of the kill threat that we have onto the enemies. But the mindset applies. If we can snowball, Darkseal is good. If we cannot, it's pretty iffy.
Yeah, I don't really think it's an amazing item in Xindra, but definitely not terrible. Moving on to key spikes here. So we've got the first strike. We've got the Lost Chapter for 750. I'm assuming that's with the Mana Crystal start. 1100 exactly. If you don't go the Mana Crystal start, if you go the Dorans. And then you've got 1150 here. And I'm assuming 1150 here is, what's this one?
It's tier plus Lost Chapter if we start with Sapphire Crystal.
Got you. So these are all relatively important, breakpoints, at least for me when I play Syndra. For me, I really start to feel online when I have my Lost Chapter and when I have my Sorks. But then again, I'm biased because I play a lot of Aerie, so that's really what I'm looking for with Aerie. I'm looking for the Sorks, I'm looking for the Lost Chapter. But like you mentioned before, typically if you're going first strike, you don't need to overemphasize going for the early tier 2 boots. You want to be getting those tier 2 boots later. Focus more so on getting your mythic and building your tier 2 boots later on.
Exactly.
Anything else you'd like to comment on here?
Yeah, we're going to go a bit deeper into this in the lane section, so stay tuned for that one. We're going to be starting off with her Q. Syndra's Q is her most important trading tool in the lane, and therefore it can be the difference between winning or losing a lane by good or bad Q usage. So what are we looking for to throw our Q and to land it? That's especially what we're going to be focusing on in this section of the guide. How to actually land our Q. What are the things that I'm looking for to make sure that I hit my Q a high percentage of the times? So first of all, our Q is just a pure skill shot. That means that it's easiest to hit when enemies stand still. One of the most common reasons why enemies stand still is when they go for an auto attack or for a CS in this case. Very high percentage Q, and they either have to make a decision between that minion or getting the Q to the face. And 9 out of 10 times we're going to be landing Qs like these. Then secondly, we're going to be playing against a lot of champions with dashes. For example, against this Qiyana. It's very important that we use our Q on the right time in these matchups. Otherwise, we're going to be losing a lot of pressure in the lane. So what I do, to rewind this real quick, is I actually hold my Q until she uses her dash. If I do not do this, right, this is really important. If I do not do this and I throw my Q out, she dashes over it. She has 7 seconds in the lane where she can do what she wants without feeling pressured by her Q. There's a downside to throwing out our Q. We get it on a cooldown and it's a big pressure tool where enemies can get free CS or free move into the lane without feeling pressured. So what's really important with Syndra's Q is that we have a less is more mindset. It's very important that we want to get high percentage hits on our Q. So instead of just throwing 10 or 12 Qs out and just throwing it out thinking like, okay, let's just make the coin flip happen and see if it hits, and we land about 6 of them, I would much rather just make sure we throw out 8 and we hit 6 of them. Why? Because these other 2 to 4 Qs that we throw, then our Q is on a cooldown and that gives the enemy room to breathe in the lane. So it's very important that we play with the less is more mindset right here and that we make sure that we hit our abilities and not just throw it out, because that gives the enemy freedom in the lane. And that's exactly what I do here. I wait until the right time to hit my Q and I get massive pressure in lane from this. And this allows me to get even better trades right here. And she's just getting absolutely destroyed like this. So next up, we can fake our Q or like fake our combo in general. So I've got this in slow motion right here. What do? So I walk up right here. I go for an auto attack and I walk back. See me walk back right here. This gives the enemy a sign that they can walk forward. So because I walk back, this guy is walking forward. And then because our abilities can be cast at max range and that we can actually tether our abilities, she walks back and I can then hit her with a combo and it's basically impossible for her to dodge. So that's a really nice trick that we can use in our lane to land our abilities better. This is what I talked about tethering, right? Our Q can be cast at max range while we run outside of it, and that way we can get a nice high range Q without the enemies being able to retaliate. Of course, we can also use terrain to hit our abilities right here, especially when we're pushing into a melee champion. They're going to be next to the tower. I'm going to rewind this real quick. They have to get this cannon, so they have to stand next to the tower, and that means that I can freely hit them with my abilities because there's no other way where they can go. Makes it very easy, very high percentage to hit our abilities. In this case, high value Qs are a thing. More or less, if we play Victor or Orianna, what we want to do to get wave control is we want to hit and the ability, our ability, and on the wave and on the enemies. And in this case, it can also just be applied with Xindra. In this case, Akali is pushing me in. And because she's pushing me in, I would like to hold the wave on my side because that's where I'm safe and where I can actually pressure this Akali. And to rewind a little bit, what she does is she tries to hard shove this. So I use my abilities onto the wave and onto her to actually thin the wave and get damage onto her. And it's really frustrating for her to play against this. Moving on to Syndra's W. So Syndra's W actually changes in the way we use it depending on the stage of the game. So in the early lane and before we got our W upgrade, it's mainly used as a tool to hit Q or get a splinter stack afterwards. Whilst post our upgrade, it actually starts to become our major damaging tool because of the true damage that we gain through it. So in the early lane, what I do is I use to pick up my W, I try to get a hit on it onto the enemies, and that basically secures a Q because that allows us, it slows the enemies and that allows us to get a pretty free Q because it's very hard to dodge our Q when enemies are slowed. Another trick that we should understand when we're playing Xindra is that when we cast our W, and that's something that I want to show in both of these examples right here. So if we use our W, the ball is going next to us. And when we throw it out that way, it actually goes from next to us onto the enemy. So it's like next and behind of us. So what we see right here, how to get a fast W off, is to actually be turned with our back towards the enemies, pick it up, and then throw it like this. And that actually gets a really fast W cast like this. Otherwise, if we stand with our front towards LeBlanc, it actually has to go all the way to here and then only throws it out. So that way we can reduce the travel time and makes it easier to hit. So now let's move on to after our W upgrade. Let's see how we use our W in our combinations. So it's much less of facilitating ability, but more of a damaging ability. And that's what you're going to be seeing in the next few clips. Is the way I use my W right here is usually when they're stunned to get the nice true damage, and it's a massive amount of burst. We get the stuns into W and it just deals a lot of damage. And the longer the game goes, the more damage it's going to do. That's exactly what we're going to be seeing right here. Massive W deals insane amounts of damage, and it's much less of a facilitating tool right here and more of a nuke. And that's basically the main stuff that you have to understand about W. Let's move on to E. Alright, so next up we got Xindra's E. So in my opinion, Xindra's E is her most important ability of her kit. And the difference between a really good Xindra player and a just good Xindra player is mainly her E usage and her understanding of the pressure of what the ability provides in the game. So let's talk about her E. Her E has defensive and offensive capabilities, and I'm gonna let this clip play out in the meantime. Let's talk about the pressure of E. So when should we use our E defensively and when can we use our E offensively? That's one of the most questions that I've got in the Q&A, but also by other Xindra players from the MLA. So it all depends upon threat. And in this case, I'm playing against the LeBlanc. LeBlanc is a champion that wants to heavy trade in lane, and whenever she can, she wants to W onto me. So what I do is I keep my E specifically for this purpose, to make sure that she cannot heavy trade upon me. And I actually get, I'm actually allowed to skill up that way. So the previous two E's, as we can see, have been used defensively and with success. Because that way I stayed very high health. I was able to skill up and hit all of the minions. So I was in a very, very good position by these amazing usages of E. So examples of threat can be gank threat, or we're shoving a lane very deep, or the enemy has a key gap closer, in this case being LeBlanc's W, or when the cooldown gives the enemy too many opportunities to trade. So right here, I miss my E, and see what happens because of me missing my E. I cannot hit any ability, she outtrades me massively, I panic, I lose flash, and I literally lose my lane in this spot. And that was all because of one E right here that I miss. My E goes on a 14 seconds cooldown, and LeBlanc just gets a window that she can absolutely abuse to trade onto me. So in this case, the cooldown of my E, and especially the fact that it's on cooldown, gives the enemy an opportunity to take massive advantages of it. Another good example of a bad E like this can be in a skirmish, or in when two teams are standing off against each other next to an objective, and we just throw out our E. We hit no one in particular that was important. So now our E is on a 10-second cooldown and we get engaged upon. These are examples of how the pressure of not having E up actually gives the enemy windows. So keep in mind when you use your E, right? Are we under any kind of major threat if we use it? And in that case, it might be good to think twice before using it offensively. That's the main mindset and the understanding of pressure of E. And what another point that I want to stress in this situation is that everyone makes mistakes. Even I make mistakes, Nemesis makes mistakes with his E, and it's just a process of slowly eliminating and understanding when we can use our E defensively or when we can use it offensively, and therefore getting better at the ability usage. Very crucial that we hammer upon our E usage in the reviews. It's the most important ability, especially when it comes to mid to late game and in these harder lanes as well. To once again reiterate, this was not a time where I could have used E because I just take a very nasty trade and I lose my lane on the spot because of it. So now let's take a look at an example where I can use E and why I can use E freely here. So in this case, Akali is pushing me in and I'm under no form of threat, like 0. I'm under my tower. She is pushing in the wave. It's not like my wave is pushing into her, so it's not like I need some self-heal. She cannot really dive me, I'm too high HP. So the fact that my E is on a 14-second cooldown right now just doesn't matter. Because for the next 14 seconds, I'm going to be safe and I'm going to be in a good position. So this allows me to actually go for a good quality E like I do. Get myself a stack and it's back up before you even realize it, before we're under any kind of threat. So that's a very good usage of offensive E. So right here, we're going to move on to other tricks that we can do with our E. We can use E with an existing ball on the ground. As you can see, I Q on the ground right here. Akali, Ahri gets into the range of it. She gets hit by it. Once again, we can use our E offensively right here because in the next 9 seconds, we are not going to be under any kind of threat because the wave is not in the area itself. Another trick that we can do with our E is we can actually use our E to guarantee a stun onto the enemies. And we do this after our ult because we get so many balls on the ground right here that it's practically impossible to dodge unless they like flash it or something like that, which is also very hard to do. So to once again show this, a lot of balls on the ground because of my ultimate, and that guarantees a stun so my Graves can follow up on the gank. This is mainly used to get either a very big stun in skirmishes or team fights because we got so many balls, it can shoot out to so many directions, or we use it to just getting guaranteed stun upon the enemy. And in this example as well, Annie tries to trade upon me, she goes too deep into the lane, I know she's screwed, I use my ult to get all these balls on the ground, get the guaranteed stun and follow up with a Q because it's unmissable when she's stunned. So very practical example and very nicely usable in skirmishes and in other situations in the game. Another thing that we can do is we can E-flash. So now it's going to be shown in slow motion right here. What we do is, I want to go back a little bit. What we do is we E and then we click flash because E has a cast time. We can actually cast it just before we flash. So let's take a look at this in slow motion. So as we can see, I cast Q first and then I cast E, and because my E is still on a cast time, I can actually flash in the meantime. And then my E, instead of going off right here, goes off right here. Same concept as with Ahri Charm, but this takes a bit more practice and a bit more getting used to, because E flashing forward on Xindra, we first of all need a ball to actually make it worthwhile, and it's just dangerous. We're still a control mage, and usually we don't really E flash forward, but it can be very useful in very unique and interesting situations. So one of my favorite tricks on Xindra, using a double ball to get a guarantee stun. So in this case, we're chasing down the enemies, and see what I do right here is, we can see I'm queuing on the ground right here. Make sure that I prepare myself a ball. I pick it up with my W right here. And what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna throw my W right here. I'm gonna throw my Q right here. And I'm then going to E. So this Q is going in that direction and this ball is going in that direction. So wherever Cardus goes, if he walks up, if he walks back, he's going to get stunned. This is an amazing tool to actually gank side lanes or make picks with in the mid to late game. Very, very, very useful tool. Next up, we got E plus Q. So we E first and we Q after. Let's actually watch this again. This is a very nice trick into melee champions or dashing champions, especially Yasuo. Yasuo is a pretty hard matchup for Xindra because of his mobility, but because we can use this E plus Q trick, it actually makes it very hard for him to react to that with his own wind wall. His wind wall does block RE. So into melee champions or dashing champions, E plus Q is very, very good to do. And now finally, there's one more point about E usage that I want to stress, and this is going to be important in every single stage of the game, using E from Fog of War, at least QE from Fog of War. This is going to allow us to hit so many free picks, so many free stuns, and it's practically impossible to dodge unless you're expecting it. So in this case, I'm standing outside of Fog of War, preparing my Q, he's walking into it, free kill. And this is going to happen over and over and over. And I'm going to be abusing Fog of War because it makes RE almost undodgeable. I know Viego is right here. I'm going to sit in the bush, another free stun. How can he react? It's extremely consistent and extremely effective. And this is the way I've mainly been able to consistently win my last few Xindra games by abusing Fog of War and the interaction with RE. We can make so many free picks out of that. Right here, once again, they don't see it coming. Massive amount of damage. Yes, I die, but it was definitely worth. And then the final one. We know Shen is going to come to bot. We hide next to here, prepare a Q to get more Q stacks. And we just hit him with the combo, especially with First Strike. This is an awesome combo. Look at that, I got 123 gold from First Strike, plus the kill. This just works. Using E from Fog of War, I'm constantly looking to look for these stuns when I'm out of vision for the enemies. It's a very, very effective and consistent way of making picks. So let's talk about Xindra ult. I've got a lot of questions in the Q&A about Xindra ult, and there's definitely a few intricacies when it comes to how to use it. But let's start with the mindset of how to use Xindra ult. We want to use our ult to deal the most amount of damage or exert the most amount of pressure. If you play with that mindset, you cannot really go wrong. So to actually give a few examples right now. So in this case, right, we use it post upgrade. So usually when you use it post upgrade, you actually use it at the end of your combo to get use of the execution threshold. That's how we use the R very efficiently. But another thing that we can do is we can just use it when we have the most amount of balls available. So in this case, I'm preparing my Q for my ult. So in this case, I've got 6 balls and I deal a lot of damage to enemy Jarvan. That's the mindset that I have when I use my ultimate. It's not usually in execute unless you have post R upgrade. Another few tricks that we can do with our ult is we can actually use it for pressure in lane. So in this case, it's quite unlikely that I'm going to be killing the Akshan with Graves, but I just use my ult because it gives me a lot of pressure in lane. This guy cannot really fight me anymore, and I can just skill for the next time in the lane. If he's really low, he even has to base, and he's going to miss a few creeps. We force the enemy onto a bad reset, and it actually gives us a lot of pressure in lane, and it just helps us win the lane. Same right here. Quite unlikely that we're going to be one-shotting this guy, but because I'm quite low and I'm opting in for a reset anyway, I can just use it for pressure in lane. And right now I can just freely shove this wave. Graves is chasing the Akshan. I can just base and I just get a lot of use out of my ultimate cooldown. You can just compare it to, for example, a Victor ult or Orianna ult. Usually we're not killing the enemies with it. We can, but usually it's not the case. And we can just use it for a lot of pressure and lane control. We're still a control mage like that. But of course, once we hit a certain point in the game, we can of course kill people with it. And the way we usually want to go about it is just to get the most amount of damage. And in this case, what I do is I actually try to get the most amount of damage out of my R. I do a bit of poking onto the Akshan, use my 1 Q on the ground, use another QE onto Akshan. I've got 5 Qs right now. And just before I throw my ultimate, I use the 6th Q, which actually leads to me killing him. So it's just about how much damage can we actually get. I could have ulted him already before, but I know I've got a kill opportunity onto him. So I use my final Q to make sure that it actually executes as well, even though I don't have the upgrade yet. And then the final thing that we can do is we can use our R before our E We can also use this in certain team fights very well. And in team fights, we can, for example, shoot all of these balls and get massive advantages through them by stunning multiple people, which is also really, really recommended in especially these early game skirmishes. So to reiterate real quickly, right, the mindset that we can adopt when playing Xindra is when it comes to early game skirmishes and in lane, just try to get much damage as possible, and or pressure. Pressure also works because if we use this and combine it with an E, we can exert a lot of pressure onto the enemies. The enemies got to be very careful of these balls on the ground. And when it comes to a bit later into the game, we're mostly going to be using it for executing. If you guys have any more questions about this, feel free to ask them in the comments.
All right, so we're moving on to the passive. A lot of questions we had in the community Q&A about how many passive stacks you should have by a certain amount of time or what level. Tim, you're here to simplify it. Let's cut the crap. What do people really need to know about the passive on Xindra?
So there were indeed a lot of questions with what level do I need to reach my upgrades at? It all doesn't matter. The only thing that you have to understand is the mindset behind getting these passive stacks. So if we're playing fast, I want our mindset to be on bullying and punishing the enemy laner rather than collecting splinter shards. Why? This will lead to shards in itself. And when we're playing fast, that's more the mindset that I want to have. And it's not really about reaching our own spikes. Yes, it's good, but it will come to ourselves in the game itself because we're focused on trading anyway. But when we're playing slow, we want to have our mindset on reaching our first wave clear breakpoint. So the only real important upgrade is the Q upgrade, because then we can start taking control of waves with our increased wave. All the other upgrades, yes, it's nice to get them as soon as possible, but it's not something that you're actively focusing on and using mental stack on in the game itself. So what's the breakpoint that we want to get our Q upgrade at? Well, if we can get it on level 7, then we did an awesome job. That's really good. Can we get it consistently in every game? No, that's going to be hard. It's going to be between level 7, level 8. And that's the timing that I want you guys to be aiming for. If we do it on that, we're just going to be generally in a good spot.
Yeah, and something I want to say, and you know, at least for me personally, the way I view Splinter Stacks, I kind of view it as a compass. So if I'm getting into the review and I look at my Cinder game and I see by 7 minutes 30, I have 40 stacks, and I've got my Q upgrade, I know I've done a really good job. I'm feeling pretty good. That means I've landed the majority of my abilities. I've had a pretty solid early lane. If I'm not getting my upgrade by till 9 minutes or something, or 9:30, I've seen some pretty ridiculous ones in some MLA reviews, then that's a bit of a red flag. That's a sign that you need to go back into the review and actually get specific. Okay, am I not using 2 abilities at once? Am I missing too many abilities? What's going on? Why am I not getting as many splinter stacks? So don't really think of it as something you need to focus on in-game. It's more of like something that you can use as a reference point or a compass in your reviews after the game. And like Tim said, if you have good quality abilities, the splinters are going to take care of themselves, which we've got plenty of slides on abilities, so don't worry too much about that. Sometimes, guys, we're going to have to play lanes fast, whether that's because of the meta, maybe that's the server we're in, maybe that's just our interpretation of the champion. This is actually a game that Tim played actually in one of his scrims. I'm going to be reviewing this from a fast Syndra perspective, or sometimes, you know, it's a matchup where you have to play fast. You're forced to play fast because if you play slow, you're going to lose too much pressure, the map's going to explode, and you're going to be in a rough spot. Now, in an ideal world, when we're playing fast, we're looking to get lane control, get control over the wave, take good quality trades, get an advantageous reset, so on and so forth. But oftentimes, when we're playing these very fast, chaotic lanes, we may not have a say with exactly what's happening with the wave. I'm going to try and look at 2 different lanes. This first one is the LeBlanc one. And you'll see straight away he's trying to get that minion advantage. He's trying to auto-attack the wave. You can tell he's really having a double think about his Q usage. He's actually gone, obviously, the Airy, and in this case, the Bone Plating and C-Pot. Remember that you want your gameplay and your runes and your setup to all be aligned, all up with each other. There's no point going First Strike, Gathering Storm, and things like that if you're going to be, you know, going C-Pot. And straight away, you know, the Airy's really kicking in, the C-Pot's really kicking in, the Bone Plating especially, beautiful Q usage there. In an ideal world, we're getting high value Qs, so we can actually get the minion advantage as well. But yeah, this is obviously a very chaotic matchup, and if he were to go First Strike and take this nice and slow with the Dorans, he's going to lose a lot of pressure, he's going to lose a lot of his control, And especially in this case, he's actually in a scrim game. His jungle is probably getting invaded, and it's going to be quite nasty. So because he has the area, he has that bone plating, he has the C-pod, he's able to contest a lot more. So he's trying to space out that LeBlanc W in this situation. Still trying to contest the wave as much as he can, but because LeBlanc's cooldowns are a little bit shorter here, and LeBlanc just has a little bit more lane control, he's having to tether a lot. So back here, he's having to space a lot because he did use that E proactively and his Q's down. He can't really walk up again and again and again. But here he realizes that the wave is big enough. LeBlanc did take a lot of minion damage in the process. The C-pots, again, really kicking in. Bone plating really kicking in here as well. And because of that minion advantage, he's able to get a really, really advantageous trade. Now look at this. Look at the Graves actually invading the Kha'Zix. Imagine if we were getting shoved in. LeBlanc would be able to move into the jungle and it'd be a very different story. Now here, he doesn't quite get the kill on the back end, but you can kind of see his intention. It's about the pacing of the lane. And now he's able to force LeBlanc back. He's actually healthy enough to stay. And now he can actually create some sort of an XP advantage here and force LeBlanc on a very early reset where LeBlanc probably can't really get anything. Maybe just a Dark Seal. Now, this is an incredibly high skill cap way of playing Syndra, and something that me and Tim talk throughout the guide is that the first strike, slower style, which we'll be talking about in a second, definitely is preferential, but sometimes we don't have that choice. So as you start to develop more Syndra mastery, this is something that you guys are going to have to experiment around with at some point. But in this case, LeBlanc comes back with the TP. We've got a significant XP advantage, and we're actually going to get a much better quality recall because we've been able to stay in lane a little bit longer. Now, we don't want to stay in lane for too long because we do want to get back to base and replenish our resources and spend that gold. So it wouldn't surprise me if here Tim started to look for some more heavy trades, burned a few of LeBlanc's resources, went for a reset into TP, and replenished his C-pot stacks. You can tell his spacing here is incredibly good. Really trying to look for those fadeaway Qs as much as he possibly can. Playing off the bounce here. Now he's actively playing for the wave because he knows he really wants to get a reset here. Using his E, even though it's limited damage, just for a little bit of, trading. Again, any trading here is good because we're the ones that are going to come back and replenish resources. Plays for the wave, and then he can net himself a nice little recall. Even if he can't get the wave in and LeBlanc chooses to freeze, it doesn't really matter because he's going to be able to come back with a huge resource advantage. So fast forward here, goes back. LeBlanc does temporarily freeze, but now LeBlanc's already at half HP with only 2 C-pot stacks. He's come back now with full replenished resources, going to be able to get some beautiful vision out. And the key to success when you're playing this fast style is make sure that you're identifying your warding windows and hardcore warding and leaning. Because when you're playing fast, you're heavy trading, oftentimes you're going to be the target of a lot of junglers. And this is fundamentally what makes this fast style so difficult, is that it's not really the 1v1, although yes, the 1v1 is going to be quite mechanically demanding and a lot of spacing and tethering and a lot of trading. But your mental stack is going to be very overwhelmed thinking about the trading and actively engaging with the enemy. Therefore, you're a lot more susceptible to ganks. So that's one of the other reasons this is, again, such a high skill cap way of playing Syndra. And not something we recommend for beginners, that's for sure. So here, just getting back into the ability usage, you can tell now he's letting the wave bounce out a little bit. He knows that he's going to have full lane control. There's no point continuously shoving here because he can actually freeze the wave on his side because he has such a significant resource advantage. And if he were to permanently shove, LeBlanc would be able to just catch that farm with the tower, and LeBlanc would be able to go for another recall scot-free. Now, if we are able to thin the wave out a little bit, make it difficult for LeBlanc to reset and actually pressure or threaten the freeze, this LeBlanc's going to be in a lot of trouble. So you can see how Tim is doing a very good job of thinning the wave out so it doesn't get too big. If he didn't thin the wave out and look for Qs on the wave, then LeBlanc would be able to slow build this wave and get an easy recall. Very, very good stuns there, getting those splinter stacks up. Again, remembering that your priority isn't splinter stacks, it's really just getting trades. Freezes the wave, LeBlanc has to recall inevitably, and now we are in an extremely good position. A lot more resources. Now we've actually got the level 6 advantage. So fast forward, it looks like he freezes for quite a while. There's no reason for him to actually recall because he has full HP and still 2 C-pot stacks left. LeBlanc has to inevitably walk back, tries to peel away his jungler. LeBlanc comes back, and now we've got that nasty XP lead. And this is where we can oftentimes look for proactive R usage for lane control. But yeah, again, we typically want to be looking to really push the pace of this lane, abuse our XP advantage, and go for another recall. when you're taking C-Pot, you're playing area and you're playing this fast, you don't want to be elongating your lanes. You want to be really looking for often tempo resets, because that's the whole point. You want to replenish those resources, utilize those C-Pots. So LeBlanc comes back, gets chunked. They went for a failed invade. It doesn't quite work for them. And now we can start a slow build and harass into another reset, and ideally a kill if we can. If we can't, no stress. Either way, we've got a very nice lead heading into the mid game. LeBlanc's actually even gone an extra Dorans in the meantime to try and negate, or I guess better answer this early game pressure from Tim. Tim has beautiful poise, really relaxed, identifies that LeBlanc is in a bit of an awkward position, jammed up against the wall. So Tim is able to go for a beautiful QER and ends up looking for a kill on the back end, but just gets ganks and trades 1-for-1. So to be honest, I think it could have been a little bit cleaner. Knowing that Graves was in the area, he could have played for the alpha lane control, been a little bit more conservative, or flashed maybe upwards there. Who knows, and just accepted reality he can't get the kill. But to be honest, this is not really the purpose of this point, of this slide. We really just want to show you what fast-paced laning really looks like. Now that we've kind of explained what the foundation of playing fast looks like, we're actually going to go into another example versus a melee matchup. So in this case, we have Syndra into Qiyana. Now, Syndra traditionally is quite good into Qiyana. This Syndra went airy, so again, a very aggressive setup, and Scorch on top of that. And you'll see, because you're versing a hardcore melee with that of the Qiyana, Syndra is able to definitively slow build waves. And the key to success when you're playing versus melees as Syndra, and if you are looking to play that fast style, it requires very good quality jungle tracking and very good quality warding and leaning. Now you're seeing this lane, the Syndra does a very good job of slow building waves, very patient ability usage, and doesn't die to a gank, which is one of the most important things when playing this style of Syndra. This is not something you see as often nowadays. I would say, we're kind of referring to this earlier on in the guide, where airy kind of used to be the stock standard approach to Syndra, but people just realize, you're kind of limited in terms of what you can get done now due to the high cooldowns of Syndra, so you're better off going first strike. But there are situations like this where you can absolutely dominate your opponent if you're extremely competent with the champion, have good quality warding, leaning, and ability usage. So this is the power of slow building and harassing. Thanks to that ward on the Raptors, we knew that Kha'Zix had a 3-camp bot side, loop on the top side. Now Syndra knows she's not really under any threat. And if you feel like you're under threat, you can always just hold your E, and then you're going to be completely fine. Now this Syndra's probably thinking, well, I don't really need to panic here. I've got my E. Qiyana actually is not even sitting on water element, so I don't need to be scared. So as long as she's conservative with that E usage, we don't even need to be too concerned about Kha'Zix here. Now, as you can see, instead of permanently shoving this Qiyana under tower, she knows that the most threatening thing would be to allow the wave to come out. She's got a beautiful ward now on that bot side that she can just lean to, just in case Kha'Zix rubber bands back onto the bot side. But she's got look at the warding, look at the leaning. Very good fundamentals. Now, this Qiyana, in my opinion, really dug herself a hole by taking way too much damage levels 1 to 2. And she didn't take TP. She went Electro Ignite. And to be honest, if you're going Electro Ignite and you don't have a really good quality levels 1 to 3 on Qiyana, you're going to have a rough time, because this is what competent control mages, or specifically Syndras that go area and Scorch, are going to be able to do to you. So again, letting that wave come out. Here, it's a bit hard, I think, for her to follow into the river. I think Kha'Zix is actually showing on a ward top side, so Syndra knew very specifically where Kha'Zix was here. Very poised, very controlled. Notice how there's not really spamming of abilities, because we know we don't want to over-thin the wave, because if we over-thin the wave, then the wave will be coming back to her unnecessarily. We've got a definitive freeze. And as you can see, Qiyana can't really play the game. Wave's frozen, beautiful chain CC into a kill, and that's, lane over. So notice how there's a bit of a stark contrast. We have these, melee or low range matchups where we can go airy Scorch and play, have a lot of lane control and have a say over exactly what's going to be happening with the wave. And then we kind of have these range matchups where if you want to play fast, you're going to have to trade HP for the wave, utilize that C-Pot, heavy trade, tempo reset, that sort of thing. So as you can see, not an easy way of playing Syndra, but definitely doable. And if you feel like you need to do it based off the game that you're in, or maybe that's a style you want to pursue, play around with it. Hopefully it gives you a little bit of an idea of what you should be looking for.
All right, so we're going to be taking a look at the slow lane on Xindra. And in this case, I've opted in, of course, for the first strike setup, which is usual when I want to play slow. And I've also opted in for Sapphire Crystal plus Refillable Potion. So that means that, let's start with my first major reference point, which is that I want to reset on 750 gold. Why? It gives me Lost Chapter. And post Lost Chapter, I can actually take control of the lane because I get the stats that I need for it and the resource regeneration that I need for it. So before that, I'm going to take it a bit on the back foot, which is completely fine. My mindset is just to get as much CS as possible, get to that 750 gold, and then go for a reset. That means that we can play waves multiple ways. Against certain champions you want to get pushed in early, against certain champions you want to push, and against other champions you want to keep it neutral. It's kind of what feels good with, for you, as long as you reach that 750 gold power spike on our Lost Chapter. That's our first major reference point that we are looking to always copy in our games. If we can do that consistently, we're going to have consistent success with it, with this style of Syndra. So let's talk about trades in this kind of style of Syndra. Why are we trading and what's the mindset of us trading? So I'm only trading to alleviate pressure from the lane. So I'm using my trading and my abilities to actually make sure that he gets pressured in lane so he cannot pressure me and I can get my first reset. Sounds crazy, but it works. And another thing that I can think about is to actually use my trading tools to actually get my splinter stacks. Those two things are the most important things. Otherwise, heavy trading is not that good. We mainly want to opt in for small wins, so we just get like a Q or like a QE or a WE and then get out. So another thing that I want to stress for this style of Xindra is minion dematerializer. It's crucial. Against certain matchups, we need minion dematerializer to force ourselves onto this good first reset. So what we can do is we can then demat the cannon. And if we're playing, for example, against the Victor, their wave push cannot handle us dematting the cannon. So we can then play with a slow build and get ourselves onto a good reset, even though we're in a bad matchup. So in this case, we see I reset on 750 gold. I get myself the Lost Chapter. I TP bolt. I get a nice kill. And catch the wave. I go back mid. Ezreal messes up his tempo slightly, loses his flash. So from this point, because I got a good reset and he made it one mistake, I can actually start taking over the lane. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to do that by pressuring him, by using my wave clear advantage over him, and by pressuring him in the lane. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm slowly pushing this wave, and I'm making sure that I get my passive stacks onto this Ezreal. So he's stuck answering this wave, and I'm just slowly making sure that I push into him and pressure him. I take these short trades, these bursty trades where he cannot retaliate onto me, and sometimes also look for a Q like this when he goes for a CS. And the lower he gets, the better it is. I want to elongate this lane until my next power spike, which is mythic actually. So that's actually quite a while, but that's completely fine because we got the tools, we got the resources to do it. So, and we can actually, with good warding and leaning, we can actually get to that point as well. Sometimes we can also just reset between Mythic and Lost Chapter on a Blasting Wand or something like that. Doesn't really matter. As long as we make sure that we catch all the XP and all the gold, aka all the minions in the lane as possible. So what I do right here is I just keep pushing him in, pressure him like that, and I use Fog of War to get these nice little bits of poke onto him slowly but surely. And I can just take control in the lane from a massive difference onto him, a massive distance actually. And slowly but surely I'm just chipping away at this HP bar. I'm in a very happy position right here. I keep pushing. I'm hovering top right now because Nidalee is right there. So I know for a fact that Jarvan has a rough time ganking me through top lane. He's been camping bot anyway. And I'm slowly looking for these trades. Beautiful bit of damage. This allows me to take control of the lane. I dodge out on his ult. I know he's so low. I know he doesn't have TP, so I can now just stay for my mythic. Make sure that because he's so pressured, I reset later than him. He's under threat right here, so I can just dictate the lane. I get myself the mythic gold. I reset. And from this point onward, we're going to be reaching a different stage of the lane. and slowly approaching the mid game. And we're in a very, very, very happy spot as SYNDRA right here, and we can take control from this point onward. And we're going to be talking about that stage of the game right now as well.
Now we're going to be talking about how to take over a lane with Xindra. So once we've established that lead due to good quality Xindra ability usage and fundamentals like we've covered in the guide so far, we're going to be in really favorable scenarios at one point or another. So this is a classic example of how to really demolish and annihilate your opponents. As you can see here, we've got really good quality farm at this stage. Don't really have a ward for the ledge yet. So the first premise, what we really want to understand when we're playing Xindra, is we want to be exerting a lot of pressure. You don't want to be freezing waves post 10 minutes with your lane control. We want to be getting pressure. We want to be hovering out of vision. We want to be establishing vision, trying to spot out the enemy jungler and complementing our team if things happen. We're in the river or on a side lane, whatever. But in the meantime, right, we can use this fog of war, utilize this fog of war to pressure the enemy because they don't know what we're doing, right? Especially if we have a pink in here or if we don't allow them to establish vision. So one of the things that Tim in this VOD does a really good job of is utilizing that fog of war to fish for good quality trades. So what Tim here, as you can see here, he hovers bot, shadows, realizes the play's over, and instead of just showing in the middle of the lane, uses this little crevice here to get a good quality QE trade because the Talia didn't see where Xindra was. So this is going to be a recurring theme. When you're ahead, especially in the mage v mage matchups, but to be honest, even into the mage versus assassin matchups, we want to be using that fog of war to look for good quality trades. And again, hovering in between the waves. Wouldn't surprise me if he establishes vision on the next rotation here, gets a beautiful kill from a long-range snipe, getting absolutely out of control. So look at this. So he gets the kill, gets a beautiful ledge ward. That's going to allow him to heavy lane. Notice, instead of showing on this wave immediately because he sees bot pressuring, he starts to shadow bot side, hover out of vision because they don't know what you're doing. They don't know whether you're fully committing, going halfway, or just sitting in this bush, or even recalling, right? So in this case, he's just trying to relieve a little bit of pressure bot, realizes that he can't quite go there yet, given that his Kha'Zix is in a position, he doesn't have any gank set up, so he decides to stay back mid. Notice this, rinse, repeat, hover bot, shoving, hovering. Realizes nothing can happen, goes back mid. You'll see in a second. Notice how he's trying not to show on vision so he can utilize that fog of war. If someone comes mid, he can fish for those stuns. So again, looking for the stun. Talia has a better response this time, but again, you can see the intention from Tim. This is a really, really effective way of pushing your lead. Now note he sees Na go deep on top side, so instead of hovering bot, he decides to hover top side. Getting pressure also gives you access to plants, which is going to allow you to keep that pressure up as well. Fast forwarding here, decides not to reset because he saw Talia base or get chunked. Decides to stay again. We'll see if he tries to use the fog of war. Can't quite use that fog of war. Maybe could have been a little bit more patient there. Does have a beautiful ledge ward again on that bot side, so we can hardcore lean. Gets a nice little recall. Comes back. Now notice how he didn't immediately use his TP back to lane, because now that empowered TP comes up post 10 minutes, that can be very good for adapting to plays that happen in the side lane. Sees a bit of action, decides to TP in. So the key is post 10 minutes, once you're already ahead, you don't want to be consistently only playing for your lane, holding waves, neutral, freezing waves, all that crap. You want to be exerting a bit of pressure, hovering to sides, and then again, using that fog of war to get even better quality trades on your opponent. It's like a bit of a double whammy. You're simultaneously exerting pressure on the map while creating threat on the opposing mid laner. So again, first things first, what I'd be doing here is, getting the wave out, and then getting that vision so I can hardcore lane. So again, he's trying to fish for trades, but not afraid to get pressure. He gets that beautiful deep ward, and this is going to give him plenty of flexibility here. And now, again, if Talia decides to try and follow, we can hover around the edges. And this is where we can look for really good quality trades. Here, he misses his stun, which is a bit sloppy from Tim, but the premise is really good. So one other thing that I did want to talk about in this VOD is how to properly clear waves. This is something that is not really often talked about. So here, for example, if you want to clear the wave the most efficient way, pick up one of the melees, throw it onto the backline, AoE it with the W and the Q, and then you can spend the rest of your Qs AoEing the melees in the cannon grouped up together. That's a very, very efficient way of clearing waves. So other than that, guys, pretty straightforward. Once you're ahead, to summarize this one, we want to be establishing vision. We want to be leaning to our vision. We want to be hovering out of vision in between the waves to exert pressure on sides, relieve pressure from sides. And then while we're using this fog of war, look for opportunistic trades, using fog of war for those stuns to really, neutralize the enemy. So in these guides, we really try to get across our mindset because the mindset is going to allow you to know where to direct your attention or how to think about your decision making in game. Now, this less is more mindset is something that Tim and I have really been trying to articulate in many of our guides, a lot of other control mages specifically. And it is something that's quite hard to articulate. So we're going to have a crack here. We're going to talk about what we mean by this. And at the end of this, Tim's going to walk through some examples of what this actually looks like. Now, really what this is all about, Tim, is, as a control mage, you don't really have much quote unquote proactivity. You can't run around the map roaming to side lanes. You can't be diving side lanes. You're not playing like an Ari or a TF or a Pantheon. Ultimately, when you're playing control mages, we need to value our farm. We need to value our life. We need to put ourselves in good quality positions. And by simply playing in accordance to Syndra's identity, the wins kind of generate themselves. Am I interpreting this correctly?
Yeah, exactly. So the thing that we have to understand is less is more means that we are just going to do what we want to do, and we're not going to overcomplicate it or overforce it. We don't have to. We're playing a scaling, one of the best scaling champions in the game, so we can just play high percentage. And if we play towards our own identity, it being a control match, we let the enemies come into us. We make sure that we're there on time. We don't do too crazy stuff. We don't have to go for outplays. As long as we play beautiful League of Legends, the wins will come to us, especially in our case being Xindra. We've got amazing pick tools with our E. And we just need to hit one good E in a mid to late game skirmish or team fight, and the win will literally unfold in itself.
It's the same with Victor. It's actually very similar with Annie. It's somewhat similar with Cassia. A lot of immobile control mages. It's about the same thing. Controlling choke points. All it takes is good quality positioning, one good quality skill shot, and the game wins itself. The only kind of somewhat metaphor that I have it's a bit of a scuffed analogy or a scuffed metaphor is that of a game or a sport that we have in Australia called AFL, or footy. And so essentially the way I view it, and look, you can skim over this shit if you don't if you don't understand it. But essentially,
It's a good one.
so essentially when I was when the game starts, we have something called like a ball up. So the ball kind of gets thrown into the air, and then two people need to contest the ball. So if you compare it to say European normal football, the team starts with the ball in their possession, and then they can just pass it off and move on. But imagine in some alternate reality we have a different type of European football, and then the ball kind of comes down, and two people need to contest the ball from second one. That's essentially what happens in football. So two people need to grab the ball and they need to pass it off to basically to someone else. When I was a kid and I used to play this sport, there was always this kid at school who was always like kind of sitting around the edges. He'd be like watching the play happen, and he was always just knowing where to be. So he wasn't, we're all young kids. We're just scrambling over the ball, trying to run towards the ball now. But little did we know, we don't need to be running at the ball now. We need to be thinking about where it's going to be in the future. And, that kid, that guy who's kind of watching the ball, letting it unfold, and then putting himself in the right position to get the position and run down the field, he was really, really good. He had a lot of success in the sport. But, tying this back to League of Legends, it's about, playing Syndra and playing a lot of these control mages. It's not about what's happening now. It's about where do I need to be in the future? Where is the play going to happen? Where are they going to be walking from? It's all about anticipation. The more you can be using your lull states to identify what's going on, where is everyone, where do I need to be, where are those key threats coming, the game just unfolds. The game just naturally unfolds, and you're naturally going to find the games to be very easy. So that's the mindset that we need to try and, embrace. And, bit of a scuffed analogy, but hopefully it gets across the point.
I think it was a beautiful example, and good League of Legends examples of that same analogy is, for example, Dragonfight coming up in 1.5 minutes, or Barons, or any other objectives. Those are places where enemies are going to go. We can prepare that in a way. We can make sure that we can get the area first, and we can let the enemies come into us. There's one more thing that I want to add with this less is more mindset, is that it's also shown in our ability usage. Because Syndra, as we discussed about in the ability usage slides, also plays a lot with downtimes, especially on our E. If we have used our E, we give the enemy a lot of windows, a lot of time to actually punish us. Because it's our only self-peel ability, and it's one of the most crucial and game-breaking abilities in the mid to late game, it's very important that our E's count. We cannot just be throwing around our abilities and our E's, because the enemies are going to be abusing our downtime and our cooldown, which will lead to us being in positions where we do not want to be in. So it's very important that we make sure that when we use our abilities, that they count. All right, so let's take a look at the less is more mindset on Xindra, and I'm going to show two examples, one in the early game and one in the mid to late game. So right now I'm playing Xindra against an Akshan, and what do we know about Akshan? Akshan is an early game champion. He wants to push the pace of the game, make skirmishes happen. So I know he wants to trade onto me aggressively, so what I do is I just make sure I stay outside of his range and that my ability usage is very solid. My Qs, I just want to tether his auto attacks, and my Es, I want to make sure that I only use it offensively when I get the chance. Otherwise, he can just slingshot up on me, and then I take a very mean trade, and I don't really want to lose health in this matchup. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just slowly chipping away at his HP bar. This was a very good E because I'm not under any kind of threat, so I can just E him on that point. And right now I'm just going to be playing with the bounce. I'm going to slowly bounce this wave out back into him, and I'm going to slowly chip away at his health bar without losing any of mine. The slower this lane goes, even though I have taken the fast setup, which is kind of necessary in this game, otherwise he's just going to be able to walk away with the lane and just disrespect me, which is not something I want. But the slower this lane goes and the healthier I can get into mid to late game, the better it's going to be for me, because I know my champion is going to be so much stronger and so much easier to execute than Akshan will. So I'm just slow building, and right now the wave's getting quite big. I know Akshan wants to walk up real soon to get that minion. I get a pretty free QE right here. Beautiful stuff. And the reason why I can use my E right here is because he cannot really go onto me right now. He's getting a bit too low. I've got a few too many minions next to my side. So that was actually pretty solid E. I'm not under a lot of threat. So I know that Shaco can possibly gank. He shows on top right now. So I just slowly keep chipping away at Akshan's health bar right here. Crash the wave. And then I'm in a phenomenal position. All my abilities were thought about in lane. They were not rushed. I landed the majority of them, and I did not give Akshan any windows to trade back onto me, which is exactly less is more, and it worked. So right now I'm going to show about a clip in mid to late game, where the less is more mindset is sometimes applied correctly and sometimes applied incorrectly. So let's take a look at this. Does this seem like good less is more mindset? Well, in my opinion, not really, because it's really overforced. If we look at my jungler, he's not positioned, my Kai'Sa's not positioned, my top laner is not well positioned, and my Xerath is very low. So this is just not a time to look for something. I kind of got a bit over eager, and I got punished for it. No E, got flashed upon by Annie, and we got ourselves into a very awkward position because of me trying to force too much. It wasn't even necessary because we were very ahead. If I just waited a bit longer, wait for my team to get on tempo, it would have been awesome. So I get very lucky that my team makes a pick onto enemy Aphelios, and therefore they cannot do Nashor. Sometimes you just gotta get a bit lucky. And right now we're gonna we see that enemy Annie tries to make a play, and I'm gonna take it a bit slower right now. The dragon is coming up, so I want the enemies to walk into us. Let the wind come into me. Make sure that I go sit in fog. Get a good quality QE, and that's all I have to do. Just let them come into me. Let the wind come into me. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. My team is going to start this dragon, and I know that the enemies want to face check through either this corridor or through mid lane. Luckily for me, I got wards on both sides. We just sweep this, so I know that I'm out of vision. And I'm going to abuse this perfect situation to actually get a massive chunk onto the enemies. So enemy support walks in, get a beautiful stun onto enemy support and enemy AD, which leads them to die. I got my self-peel with my Archangel's passive, and this leads to us getting the Drake for free. I just let the enemies come into me. I just let the wind come into me. Instead of over-forcing, right now we were on tempo, and it just worked out phenomenally. Amazing E. And game winning, actually. This pushes us to the next step. So right now, Nash is next, so we're going to be playing around top side. We're getting a lot of poke onto the enemies by my team playing amazingly well. And once again, I know I need to make sure that the enemies cannot come into me. So I see Annie try to flank us right here with her ult. So I try to control this choke point right here. Just Don't do something crazy. Just make sure that she cannot walk in there. So she walks into my E and she dies. Beautiful stuff. Sadly, Wukong steals the Baron, but it's still okay. It happens. Crazy Kaisa damage, by the way. Let's see that again. Beautiful. So, pretty good stuff. Not a bad play at all. Of course, we could have gone a Nash and would have been better, but the mindset still stands. Next up, same principle. I want to get my team onto tempo. I want to go into Fog of War, and I just want to let the enemies come into me so I can look for a beautiful E. I know we have a control ward right here. I know the enemies want to either make a play somewhere with Nash, which is either going to be on mid or bot. So I'm in a pretty safe position right here, and I'm just waiting for my team to get on tempo, not doing something too crazy, not going too deep. And if the enemies decide to contest mid wave right here, I can be right there to maybe look for a pick, maybe look for a stun. But it seems that enemies actually go into our bot side jungle. But that's perfect. I'm sitting outside of vision right here, and we get a perfect pick onto the Annie. Very easy. We just let them walk into me. We use Fog of War and the E to actually get that free, easy pick. And then we get the pick on Wukong as well. And this eventually leads us to winning the game.
All right, so we're diving into a mid game. This was one of your somewhat recent mid games, and we think it fully encapsulates all of the kind of the fundamentals of Syndra mid game. So where do you want to start here? We're 15 minutes in.
Yep.
What's the first thing that comes to mind heading at 15 minutes in as a Syndra?
So game is not looking too well. We're a bit behind, but we're not too much behind to the point that we cannot play anymore. And if I'm playing Xindra in a situation like this, it's actually completely fine because remember, we skill. So my mindset in a situation like this is also going to be that I want to value my life. Patience is key, and I want to keep up my farm to make sure that I can hit my item spikes and eventually be getting stronger. So we are playing a control mage, and Xindra is one of the purest control mage when it comes to that. Is she wants to be decently early at objectives. She wants the enemies to come into her and control areas through using her abilities correctly, especially E usage. We're going to be hammering on E usage in this stage of the review a lot. But it's mainly just letting the enemies come into you, force them to make mistakes by using positional advantages.
Yeah, and there's going to be a few key themes that we're going to reiterate here. Like, you're going to hear us sound like broken records here. Valuing your life, keeping up your farm, getting to objectives early, making the enemy come to you. It's just the same thing over and over again. Syndra's mid-game, from a theory perspective, is not that complicated. It's the execution that is difficult, right? Which, like many other control mages. And all we're doing, again, we're doing nothing, nothing fancy here. We're keeping up our farm. We're heading into the mid-game in a pretty okay position. Relatively even state game. So it looks like a bit of action was here.
And the thing that's going on through my mind right now is there's three core things that I'm thinking about. Keeping up farm, hitting item spikes, making sure that we're on time for objectives, and making picks with my E. Those three things are basically going through my mind all the time. Communicating this to my team. And I'm going to be looking to get myself into positions where I can actually look to pick the enemies, create a man advantage, and once we reach that point in the game, it's going to be way easier to play out.
Yeah, and half of the battle is simply key threat assessment as well. Like, when you're coming off these lull states here, you should be, again, priming your mental stack about, what are those key threats? Who do I need to be careful of? This is one of those games where, I would say the major key threat is probably the Hecarim dive. Nautilus, obviously, worth, keeping an eye on as well, but Hecarim probably the major key threat here. So as long as we're keeping an eye on that Hecarim, we're keeping ourselves safe from the Hecarim, we should be okay. This was a little bit awkward, wasn't it? Because I remember, it looks like here, Graves took your top farm, so you're forced to kind of go mid here, which has been unfortunate. And it looks like that's a Twitch support from the looks of things. So, yeah, you needed to go mid because no one was mid. And this is the power of heading into the mid-game strong as well. I mean, if you didn't have 2 items by 17 minutes, we probably wouldn't have been able to kill that Rumble. So we're in a pretty solid position now.
exactly. And this is also what you see is the enemies make a slight mistake. They try to overload bot lane, and that allows us to get a man advantage on this Rift Herald, get us another free objective. Um, I think we can skim through it a little bit.
Easy.
And yep,
Well, I think there is something worth considering here is that we actually don't have Flash anymore. We actually use Flash for this playback here with the Rumble. So that's something that's really going to alter our threat assessment massively. So moving forward, that's okay. Sometimes you're going to have to use your Flash, but as an immobile control mage, yet again, that's going to alter the amount of threat that we're under. That's also going to have a say on how we use our E as well, right? Sometimes when you don't have Flash,
for
you might
sure.
have to be a little bit more conservative with your E usage.
Yep, exactly.
So
So
same
we're
thing
going
over and
bot
over
right now.
again here. Again, valuing that farm.
Yep. And we want to be preferably on the strong side of the game. So where the next objective is going to be, where the next players are going to be, we'd like to be on that side of the map. We do not like to be on the weak side. We're going to be too vulnerable right there. And I know the next objective is going to be Dragon, and bot tower has not fallen yet, so that's why I had bot right here.
Yeah, we don't really want to be too deep on the side lane either. I think shoving and moving is typically what we want to be doing, but we can get creative with Fog of War. Very nice stun using Fog. And again, the power of, you're not even at 100 stacks here. This is not even
No,
100
no, no.
Splinter Stack. This is crazy, right? And
Yeah,
so, a very, very good usage of Fog of War. And this is something we are, speaking about a few times within this guide, using Fog of War. So,
yeah.
again, another great example of that.
Yeah, and this pick eventually leads to so much in the game, right? The enemies are completely off tempo. Um, and right now I'm actually at the point where I can assassinate enemies. I'm extremely, extremely strong. So I'm permanently looking for these traits, for these picks in Fog of War. And that just puts so much pressure onto the enemies that they lose all pressure on the map because they have to reset. They have to be scared as well about me being somewhere in Fog, since I've been doing it a big part of the game.
So this one's a little bit interesting, right? So we make that play bot side, we move our way through mid, and it looks like a play was happening top. These are the
Yep.
scenarios where you got to be quite careful. Syndra typically needs to be careful getting pincered. When there's people coming from multiple angles is where things get a little bit tricky, especially since the Graves is on bot side. Now it doesn't mean Syndra can't adapt to chaos. We actually answered this question in the community Q&A later on, or we will anyway. So you're going to have to adapt to chaos sometimes. In an ideal world, during this time, there would nothing be happening. We don't have flash, we don't have ult, we're sitting on a lot of gold. Ideally, we would get a reset, but shit happens. Sometimes you're gonna have to go to these plays. We're gonna have to adapt to the chaos. And there's the theme again, time and time again. We can attend these plays, we can help our team, but we must protect ourselves at all times.
Yep. And I would say the more item spikes we get, the stronger we get, the easier it is for us to adapt to chaos.
Very good point.
Yep. And if it's in the early game, we're not going to be too useful. But when it comes to this stage in the game, we can actually pack a real punch. And even though flanking is not really too ideal on Xindra, we could theoretically do it.
Okay, so let's get into this. This is an interesting one, right? Because your jungler is on bot side. This is one of
Yep.
those very iffy plays. It's not really necessary to win the game. It's more of an opportunistic call, right? It looks like here,
Yep.
Hecarim was on bot side, so we thought we could quickly sneak it. This is a bit of a double-edged sword. If it works, great, thumbs up. But also, the consequences if this fails is not that good, right? Because Dragon's going to be the next objective. This is where you can
Yep.
really mess up games. There are some positives of this here, right, Tim? Where, theoretically, the enemy is going to be coming into you, right? So there's that. We also have stopwatch, and we are quite strong, and we have our 100 stacks and our ultimate. So there are some positives. But because there's no one here to tank the Baron, we're really quite low. To be honest, I think we get a little bit lucky here. If we actually, Hecarim goes onto us there, even though we have the stopwatch, we're probably in a little bit of trouble. And we actually get quite fortunate that they come from different angles. Like the Rumble doesn't come with the Hecarim as well. So, look, this isn't really Syndra specific. This is more of like an opportunistic solo queue call. But this time we kind of get away with it. And that's where the stopwatch kind of came in handy. The threat of having the stopwatch potentially disincentivized the Hecarim to go onto you here.
Yeah. And one more thing to note here is in this fight, I go for the R into E. As you can see, look at my ability usage. I start with R, even though I do not have many balls on the ground, but that leads me to be able to stun both Hecarim and Nautilus and buy my team some space.
Nice. Cool. All right, so we end up winning that fight. We come back. We've now got our third item. We ideally want to be getting to that objective nice and early. And again, notice how you're using this objective as a kind of like a magnet. You're using the neutral objective as a magnet because this is where you know people are going to be heading. So we can get to the objectives early. We can control these kind of choke points and control these bushes. And this is what's going to allow us to set up those nice picks. So when you're in a commanding position or you've got the tempo, you've got control, Syndra can kind of act like a bit of like a weird type assassin, can't you? Right? You can kind of burst squishy targets.
Yep, exactly. I'm stacking my Qs on the ground right here to make sure that I get the most amount of Qs available, so my ult deals the most amount of damage. And getting this pick just secures this dragon for free.
Yeah, and look, sometimes you're not going to have this luxury to have this amount of vision control and tempo to be able to do plays like this, and that's okay. You can always default or result back to front-to-back team fighting, right? But this is, if you do have the control, this is something that you can do.
Yeah. Exactly.
So now we're rock and rolling. We've got complete control after that pick onto the Hecarim. You know, again, we're going to the next objective this time, the Baron, making the enemy come into us. Yeah, at this stage, Nautilus doesn't even know he's on vision, so we're essentially just a pick machine at this stage of the game. And again, we have Stopwatch and Flash, so we're chilling. And now it looks relatively straightforward. Now, this is, in my opinion, a great mid to late game example, because if we go back to the very start and you kind of press tab at the very start here, look at the state of the game. Very average, right? You would look at this game and some people might even say, I would even prefer to be the enemy, right? Even though top's kind of doing okay, they're relatively even. Hecarim's in a pretty commanding position. And look, you're in an okay spot, but not absolutely amazing. Like, you do have 2 deaths, and bot side is, relatively, questionable as well. This is what a lot of your Syndra games are going to look like. And the only reason Tim was able to make this game as easy as it looked was because of his farm and because he kept it simple with valuing his own life. Playing control mages like that of Syndra, it's not about the big, fancy, sexy stuff. It's about the basics done well. And if you do the basics, like we covered here today, letting people come into you, valuing your life, playing off your key spikes, your R cooldown, playing around your teammates' location, things like that, the victories are going to lead to themselves. It's not like Tim did anything fancy. Sure, there were some nice bush camps here and there, but for the most part, it was basically using neutral objectives of magnets on repeat and keeping farm up and getting to key spikes and popping off. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Lovely. So if you have any questions, guys, about this mid to late game, or you feel as though we didn't cover something that's been really a thorn in your side, let us know in the comment section below. All right, so we're diving into probably our least favorite part of the guide, the tier list. We've baited you in. We know you guys love tier lists out there in the League of Legends community. Now, look, these tier lists, they give you a very rough framework. They very much depend on the rank that you're in, the server you're in, how you interpret the champion, the matchups, and the quality of the opponent that you're versing, how much mastery they have, what the jungle matchup is. There's a hell of a lot of stuff in play here. This is a very, very rough framework for you to have a baseline think about, okay, where might Syndra fit inside your pool? What sort of champions might Syndra do well into? Tim, any comments here?
Yeah, so what we can see is that it's heavily skewed towards the easy and favorable side. That's because of our flexibility in our kit. We can, depending on the rune setup that we take and the way we want to approach a lane, we can win a lot of lanes and be in a good position. It's rather the unfavorable matchups and down that in whatever style that we take, we're just going to be in a bit of a rough position. About the hard matchups, on my own YouTube channel, I am going to be explaining in detail how to get around these matchups and what setup to take, so how to make sure that in your solo queue games you will be able to win these matchups as well.
All right, so now we're on to what to look for in draft when playing Syndra. First thing, starting on the left, we have front-to-back champions and setup. Like any other control mage, we love front-to-back champions. We love frontline. We love people that are going to allow us to set up our damage. And ultimately, whether it's a Scion, whether it's a Maokai, whether it's an Ornn, we love these champions. They're going to allow us to posture up really aggressively in fights, get our damage up without being scared. It's going to also allow us to use our E very freely without feeling like we need to hold our E for multi-threat. Anything else here, Tim?
Yeah, one more thing to add is that Syndra loves to be a secondary carry. So she wants another source of damage threat into her team. So it lifts a bit of a burden, a bit of a pressure off of her, and that allows us to be a bit more creative in our positioning and look for a bit more damage. And if the enemy or like if our Jinx gets focused, then we can clean up. And if we get focused, then that's also fine because then our Jinx can do some major work.
Yep, we can
That's,
use her as the sacrificial pawn while we do all the damage.
yeah.
Moving on to number 2, we have damage and CC split. Pretty, self-explanatory. We don't want to have a lot of AB. We want frontline as well. A lot of these champions aren't really going to offer us frontline. And then there's a lot of CC stacking here as well, which is obviously not going to work out too well with our E. Any other comments on this one?
Yeah, Xindra just hates mercs. It's very, very annoying for us to deal with. So the more champions in our team that allow the enemies to get mercs, the less favorable the draft is looking.
100%. Number 3, enemy linearity, range, in immobility. So walk me through this one, Tim. How do you view this one?
So Xindra is mid to high range control mage if we talk about her E. And I'm mainly talking about what her E is capable of doing. And what we see is against what type of champions is RE the most effective? Well, first of all, immobile champions, champions that don't have dashes and therefore cannot dodge RE. Also, champions that are slightly shorter range than us. A good example is Aphelios. Good example is, for example, like Twitch. These are these champions that have to get into your range to actually auto attack you, and that allows us to always get an E off once they get into this auto attack range. And also linearity. There's some champions that are just linear in their way of approaching the game. A good example is, for example, Set top lane. He just needs to run at you to get to you. And Xindra is amazing in these situations because her E is an amazing tool to get these champions out. So these champions are just generally gonna have a rough time into Xindra because of their shorter range, because of their low amount of mobility, and because of their linearity. They're gonna be very easy to hit with our stun. And if we see this in the enemy team, I'm smiling.
Yeah, the only one that I'd bounce back on here is the Vex, because Vex is an interesting. I think in lane, very linear, and has to get into your range. Mid game, it can be a little tricky, right? I think Vex with a multi-thread composition like that we have on the right hand side, like a Rengar or whatever, that can be a bit of a nightmare. But I think Vex, if she is the only threat, it's relatively straightforward. So I definitely see you on that one. And then we have enemy multi-threat, any immobile champs, worst nightmare. Look, and this is something we did mention earlier on in the guide. Syndra does better than a lot of others, right? A lot of other control mages, a lot of other immobile control mages, sorry, because of the way the E works, right? You can theoretically hold your E for self-peel, whereas if you're playing something like a Victor or an Orianna, no matter what you do with your other abilities, you're going to die a lot of the time. So Syndra does have that extra layer of kind of protection, but fundamentally, she hates multi-threat. If you've got a Rengar coming in from one side, you've got a Necro coming in from another side, you've got a No-Life running at your face, you're going to have a very bad time. And hence why, kind of tying back to the tier list, Syndra isn't counted by individual champions. Syndra is counted by compositions. Syndra is counted by many champions. When there's a combination of many champions together, each of them individually don't count as Syndra, but it's when they're combined together, that's what makes Syndra's life miserable. All right, so we're diving into top tips for learning Syndra. So if you're new to Syndra, you're getting into it, where do we start, Tim?
We start with getting an understanding of what our champion is capable of scaling wise. We are a scaling control mage, and this will help us with valuing our life. These two things go hand in hand. If we can value our life, we can keep our farm up, we can reach the late game, and we can deal some massive, massive damage. So who is one of the best players to watch for doing this? It's Nemesis. Nemesis is really good at keeping up his farm, making sure he stays alive. He's one of the best players to do that. So if you struggle with this point, and if you're not quite sure how to start learning Xindra, I recommend watching Nemesis Xindra and see what he's capable of doing in that mid to late game.
I want to add something here,
Yeah.
quickly. When it comes to learning champions, we're going to touch on in a second how you can't always be in the valuing your life mindset. We'll talk about it in a second, but this is a very, very, very good thing to do, because in order to know what's worth sacrificing, for example, if it's worth ditching that wave for that roam, if it's worth trading one for one in that scenario. You need to know what it feels like to farm incredibly well, 9 or 10 CS per minute without dying. You need to know what that feels like, because then later on when you start testing your limits, at least we know what we're missing out on, right? Because if you limit test from the get-go, a lot of the time when you're playing a control mage, you don't know what you're missing out on. Something to keep in mind.
Right. Next thing, E usage. We've covered in previous sections of the guide, but it's very important that we get specific about our E usage. It makes or breaks Xindra in every stage of the game, in lane, in the skirmishes, in team fights, and it's just very important that we get very granular and that we go in depth on every E that we use. Was it a good E? Could we have done it better? Did the downtime and having the cooldown of E up get us into awkward positions, especially in these standoff situations in mid to late game in skirmishes? And if we really go in depth on those E's, we'll actually get a lot of learning and understand why certain things play out the way they do. And in general, keep in mind, less is more. As we just discussed, first of all, we're gonna start feeling what we're capable of as Xindra when it comes to scaling, but we should also get comfortable with our immense skill trend. So once we feel comfortable and we understand what Xindra is capable of, we can actually start looking into understanding what we're capable of in the early game. With, for example, changing towards an airy playstyle, looking to bully the enemy lane opponents, looking to kill them everywhere, just finding angles to get fog of war, just looking to get picks left and right. And once we get comfortable with both scaling and our immense skill thread, we can get a good feeling of when we're supposed to do what in which game.
Love it. Then we've got actually the Syndra Q drill. This isn't one that we've actually taken from the Victor guide that we did a while ago. Look, back in the day with the Victor guide, there was a Victor, it's all about Victor Laser, right? And I thought it would be a really good idea for people who struggle with the tethering aspect of Syndra Q, even Syndra W, because one of the hardest things, if you haven't played a control mage like Syndra or Victor or even Oriana, people who haven't played these type of champions, they struggle with casting abilities while moving and really trying to juice the max value out of the range of the ability. There's a very big difference between, you know, actually casting your Syndra Q at max range or your Syndra W at max range versus walking a little bit too far, because the way these champions fundamentally work is that Syndra is able to pump out that damage without dying purely because she can cast the ability at max range without having to stop still, right? So it's very important that we develop this ability to cast Q and W at max range very comfortably without overwhelming our mental stack. So if you feel like this is for you, give it a crack. You know, it can be a great warm-up tool, even if you just do it for, you know, a week or two as you're developing the feel for the champion. I think it's a really great place to start. Moving on, we're going to get into common mistakes here. What's the first one here, Tim?
So first one is not letting the win come to us. How does this play out in the game? We try to overforce. I've shown some examples in the less is more mindset and also in the mid to late game section of this guide. You can rewatch those and check for this common mistake. It happens a lot, especially what I see in my coaching is Xindras try to do too much, or they try to look for these stuns while they don't have a front line, then they die and they actually lose the game on the spot. We don't have to do that. Keep in mind, we're scaling control mage. Let the enemies come to us, and if the game stalls out for like 5 more minutes, we're completely happy with that because we are very strong when it comes to scaling.
And I've actually got one thing here I'd like to expand on. One of the common trends I've been seeing in my coaching with Xindra is that, especially the people who are newer to Xindra, they don't have the confidence in their ability to scale into the mid to late game because maybe they don't have that E usage down pat, or maybe they're not confident in their threat assessment or whatever it might be. And as a result, what happens is that they try to do too much in the early game to make up for their lack of competence in the mid to late game, right? So it's okay, guys. We get it. You're probably not going to be the most sophisticated mid to late game Syndra. But if you start forcing stuff in the early lane just because you feel like your mid to late game's not good, you're never even going to get yourself into a position to let the win come to you. So something to keep in mind.
Throwing uncalculated abilities and losing pressure. So what does that mean? That means that in lane, we're throwing out too many Qs. We're having it constantly on cooldown, and that allows the enemy to actually take trades back onto us. This also works with E, and uh, this is the main E usage mistake that you see in when you're playing Xindra, is we're just using it too much. We're not using it for the right time, and therefore we put ourselves very, very vulnerable. So compare yourself to a literal Victor or an Oriana when our E is down, because we are. We don't have the self heal that ability provides when it's on cooldown. So be very, very careful with using it, and only use it when we see a very good opportunity or when we're allowed to use it. So when we're not under threat. And the final thing is using R2 one-dimensional. And that means that we're not using it to create pressure in the lane. We're not using it to create a lot of balls on the ground to get a guaranteed stun, or we're not using it to in like the middle of our combo when we have the most amount of balls up. Uh, if you want to get a bit more specific, this is all covered as well in the ability usage, and I recommend checking those slides out again. Right, so then getting greedy for kills and forgetting to value our life. So this as well kind of ties in with the first point that we make. But there's a lot of Zindras that once they get the feel the strength of their late game and the strength of their early game, they get to a bit too greedy for kills. They're looking too much for kills. This is definitely something that I'm kind of struggling with as well, which leads me to die in certain situations and puts me actually in awkward positions in the game. We are still scaling. Less is more mindset mid to late game. That's where we are the strongest, and that's also where we discuss this even more specific. Same with compensation and feeling forced to make plays. I see it a lot in my coaching. I'm sorry, Dorito, I'm gonna call you out, but it really opens my eyes that you go for these kind of early game plays because you feel like you need to, but we don't have to. Once again, we scale. Less is more, and mid to late game is definitely where we are the strongest as our champion.
And I want to make this very clear, guys. And again, the same thing. A lot of you guys watching this that don't have a lot of Syndra mastery, you are going to feel forced to try and make plays. Because again, you don't fundamentally have the skill set to make up the difference in the mid to late game because maybe your positioning's not there or your threat assessment. But you're going to have to go with the punches. It is going to feel shit. You are going to sometimes put yourself into a game-winning position in the mid to late game, and you're still going to lose because you just don't have that skill set yet. That's perfectly fine. But if you start compensating and getting all jacked up mentally, or even getting greedy for kills or forgetting to value your life, feeling forced to make plays, you're not going to have success with Syndra in the long run, even if you do develop that mid to late game that skill set. So something to keep in mind in your journey, guys. All right, so we're diving into the community Q&A. I love this. One of my favorite parts of the guide. You once said that playing Syndra and Talia is basically playing with one champion. If you have Syndra in your pool, what other champions should you avoid? Interesting question. Now, is he referring to me or is he referring to you in terms of...
He's referring to you.
To me. Okay, so I actually don't even remember when I said that. It must have been quite a long time ago. But in terms of, let's just think more holistically what Syndra likes. Look, what Syndra's biggest weakness is mobility. She struggles into multi-threat composition. So for me, when I'm in the MLA and I'm recommending champions and someone says I play Syndra, the first thing I'm looking for is, do they enjoy maybe a champ like Ari? A champion that can actually play into multi-threat compositions, or maybe even like a Silas, or something that has, or an Akshan, something that has some semblance of mobility that can play into multi-threat compositions. That's kind of where I would start. But because Syndra is a very stock standard champion, you can complement Syndra with many, many things. You can complement Syndra with maybe something that has more dive, right? Something like a Vex or a Lissandra or a Galio or whatever. Or you can go, like I said, the other side, which is more focused on the mobility. You could add an AD champion. There's a lot of flexibility here. I think maybe, I'm just going to spitball what I meant by Cinder and Talia, is that they're both scaling mid to late game mages. But I don't know if I don't really think having both of them is bad per se. I just think that there is a decent amount of overlap. What are your thoughts on this one, Tim?
Yeah, I think because Cinder is just such a flexible champion, she fits in with a lot of other champions. And yes, there's certain champions that do a bit of the similar things as she does, but maybe better excel in certain areas of the game. Um, I would say if you have any other champion that has a bit more agency in the early game and/or has a bit more mobility and/or is maybe AD, you should be good.
Yeah, so to really TLDR this, in an ideal world, it again depends on your rank. If you're Diamond Plus and you can play maybe 3 champions, like a great example of a pool would be Syndra, Ari for mobility, and then something that has a little bit more early agency.
Akshan, for example.
Akshan, great, boom, beautiful pool.
Yep.
Moving on, how far should you stay out in a fight? When I say Nemesis play, he stands ridiculously far away, like he's waiting for the fight to happen or be almost over before he throws anything, but it might be really heightened threat assessment. W usage is also a big issue of mine when and how it's used, as for most guides focus on Qs in lane and EQ stuns.
All right, so I'm going to tackle this one. So let's start with the W usage. I quickly want to turn up on that. I recommend watching back to the W usage part in this guide. It's explained perfectly the mindset of using W, and that should 100% make you understand how to go about it. So how about the interesting part? So how far should we stay out in a fight? Well, it's very important that we, of course, value our life and understand the enemy threat upon us. But the main thing to understand in these situations is, in my opinion, that we want to be using our E correctly to get a good quality, high value E without losing our pressure upon the enemies. And that means that what I would actually do, and what I think that, and what I see Nemesis also do, is he really understands when he should go for an E like this and how he can make sure that he can land those E's. So a beautiful thing that I've been doing in my last couple of solo queue games that have been allowing me to just take win after win is abuse Fog of War. Because when we abuse Fog of War, even though we might be pretty far back, but we are standing behind the ledge, the enemies are coming into us, and we get that beautiful opportunity to get that awesome high value E, stunning multiple enemies at the right time that can just turn a team fight. It's all about that E and making sure that we do not die.
And I've got something to add on to here. I think there are two parts of this. I think you are going to be in scenarios where you can use your E very freely because you have a lot of options and you've got a lot of frontline and you don't need to be holding your E for the threat of having E. Nemesis in this scenario, he might have been versing a lot of threat, and maybe he felt as though, okay, I need to actually have my E available to myself just in case someone jumps onto me, so I have access to it so I can peel other people off. Because you've got to remember, there is the value you're going to get from the using of the ability itself, but there's also going to be the threat of not using it. The fact that you simply have it ready to go, there is threat in that as well. So, yeah, like Tim said, it really comes down to what exactly is your job in the team fight, what are the key threats, and how do we get as much value from our E as possible. Moving on, from Tim Cho. Been maining Xindra a lot lately, but still confused with her identity. It feels like she is never amazing in any given point of the game, but serviceable at every point, although I thought she was a late game monster, but got shattered by Acel every game. Could she only be picked into squishy comps? Leandros doesn't feel amazing either. To center to damage to bruises and tanks until getting Deathcap and Void. Tried going Electrocute, lacking gold for Deathcap later on. But First Strike makes it that she has barely any solo kill potential early on, allowing champs like Vigar, Acel, and to free scale. I think there's a lot here to unpack, Tim. I think number one, there are many reasons as to why this player may be feeling this way. The first thing that really jumps out to me is that he's probably trying to do too much early. He's not really farming well. He's probably got sloppy splinter stacks. And by the time he actually should be on curve with Mythic, with Tier 2 boots, rock and rolling with at least 60 stacks of his splinter, getting his W upgrade, he's really not that strong. Syndra nowadays is a hyper mid to late game scaler. You need to be patient in the early game. You need to be valuing your farm. You need to be valuing your splinter stacks, obviously, and valuing your life. And what you'll find, and again, I don't know if we have the same opinion on this, Tim, feel free to jump in here, but the way I interpret Syndra into both an Acel and to a Vigar is that, yeah, you may not be able to be a hardcore bully early, but there will get a point when you get to your 40 stacks where you can really take over the majority of these lanes. 40 stacks plus Lost Chapter, in my opinion, is Syndra's kind of turning point or big major spike in the way a lot of your lanes pan out. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I fully agree. It's especially that late lane / starting of mid game when we can really start get rolling. And it's quite interesting how this question is being phrased because what he says is he doesn't feel that he's too impactful in the mid to late game. That is a sign to me that there is indeed a confusion with our identity. We're probably not playing Xindra towards what Syndra's strengths are, aka making picks, using fog, letting the enemies come into us, valuing our life. We're probably either trying to do too much or we're trying to do the wrong thing.
100%, absolutely spot on. So let us know, Tim, in the comments, Tim Cho, if this answered your question. But I think everything we've covered in this guide should completely expand your view of the champion. Moving on to Master Poya. Can Cinder still be considered a lane bully, and is there differing playstyles? Early oriented, late oriented, and what are their layouts? I think we kind of covered this with the area versus first strike, right? But really, Syndra, even with area, I wouldn't really say she is a quote-unquote lane bully. I mean, she has the ability to trade with area, but I wouldn't really say she's like a Victor or, champs that are hardcore lane bullies, personally. Yeah, would you agree, or yes or no?
No, I would say that we fully agree.
Yep. When approximately in time or levels should we get our upgrade to be in a good situation? We also covered that. Tim said level 7, level 8. I think of it more in terms of like 7 minutes 30 means you're doing a really good job. And if you're getting it at 9, 10 minutes later on, you're really messed up. So that's a good rough baseline that we covered in the guide. Max W or E second. W 100%. W is a shit ton of damage. It's not really a setup tool anymore like it used to be. Especially post 60 stack, you want to be landing that W for damage. It does a lot of damage. Always W second. When is a target really worth getting R'd in a team fight? It's a very strange question, isn't it? Again, yes. Tim, you probably have a better take on this than me. What's a clear way of articulating this one?
So I've covered the main concept about this and the mindset of using R already in the R slide. There's a slight thing that I think we can go a bit deeper upon in this question, is that there's different mindsets and times when we want to use our R. We can use it for damage. We can use it for a kill opportunity, especially post our R upgrade. We can also use it to get a amazingly big stun by having a lot of these balls on the ground and then using our E afterwards. So we can be very creative with our R usage. But when we're really talking about a target, well, that's a good question. If we're playing, for example, with a reset comp, we got a Master Yi or we got a Jinx. Then we can R the front line, just execute the enemy front line or execute the enemy fighter, get a reset for our AD carry so he can start taking over the fight. But when the enemy, for example, has a Lucian that's 20 and 4, and the rest of his team is pretty useless, we can hold our ult to use it onto the Lucian, because if we kill him, we can win the fight through that. So it's really dependent on the game state, what your team offers, what the enemy team offers. And as long as you're comfortable with the multiple different mindsets that I talked about in the R usage slide, you should be good to go.
Yeah, and I think here really what we're getting into is not even Syndra stuff. This is game stuff, right? Like knowing who to target, what the value is of a given R. It really depends on a game-to-game basis. If someone has a bounty, if someone's a key target, if they're split, this is a question that doesn't really have a succinct answer. So we've given you a lot to chew on, essentially, but don't really overcomplicate this. If you're really concerned, that's where you probably want to get some coaching. So how does your E really work, and is it possible to do the double stun anymore? Tim covers this within the E slide section, but TLDR, yes, but it's not really important. Useful wave manipulation with W. Look, sure, there are probably creative things that you can do by throwing cannons over the edge, doing a double backflip into a 360 no-scope. It's not really that important. So, yeah, we'll kind of leave it there. But hopefully we covered the main questions here. Moving on to Wombala here. It might be basic, but maybe some stuff about how do we avoid getting all-in constantly by Yasuo's, Yone, Zed's Talons. This is all E-usage. It's wave management and it's E-usage, right? If you listen to Tim's tips on E-usage, how to get max value from it, the threat of holding it, this is the sort of thing that, you'll have a much easier time. And Tim, on his channel, will be going over some of the harder matchups. I think you're going to be going over Echo as well, right?
Yep, Echo.
Sorry, Tim's going to be going a lot deeper specifically on these harder matchups on his YouTube channel. So stay tuned on his YouTube. I think he's going to go deep on that. Next question here from Mia Natsu: when to adapt to chaos in solo queue? I mean,
Always.
yeah, always. Look, yes, in a perfect world, would sit there, farm our ass off, first strike, gathering storm, get to 3 items, pop off a mid game, and carry. That would be the ideal world. The reality is that we're not going to be able to get on curve every single game. We might have to adapt to a crazy river skirmish or an invade here or do all this stuff. So yes, we have an idea, like an ideal, about what we want as a Syndra. Protect yourself at all times. You know, we don't really want to get involved with too many river skirmishes and stuff like that. But ultimately, welcome to solo queue. You've got to do what you can. And the mindset here is what me and Tim have really been reiterating. Play in accordance to your champion's identity to the best of your ability. Protect yourself at all times. Keep your farm up. Do what you can while keeping yourself alive. That's really the mindset that you've got to adopt. And the last one here from the Lone Alpaca. What is your favorite Syndra skin? We'll start with you, Tim.
All right, this is an important one. Yes. So there was a big discussion in the MLA about Syndra skins. And I know for a fact that base Syndra is the cleanest Syndra in the game. All the other shit, the Spirit Blossom Xindra, it's pay to lose. It's literally pay to lose. So I recommend just sticking to the base Xindra. The balls are clean, the auto attacks are clean, nothing can go wrong.
I got two things. I think Star Guardian is terrible and absolutely disgusting. It is the biggest bait of a. It actually I swear it does less damage, like 100% less damage. I'm 100% convinced. I think the only one that's actually serviceable is I like the Atlantean one. I think the Atlantean one's actually not bad. I feel like if you're gonna go one, the Atlantean one's okay.
Fair enough.
But that's it for the community Q&A. Let's move on.
All right, so we're going to be taking a look at a review from a Xindra game that I played a bit ago. And in this game, it shows it beautifully how we're going to have a nice, consistent lane and how important the mid game and skirmishes are when it comes to actually using that lead to winning the game, especially when it comes to ability usage. And I make some mistakes. I'm going to be pointing out these mistakes, and that leads me, instead of carrying the game, to losing the game. So let's take a look. We're playing slow Xindra. We're playing against a Swain. What I want to do, I want to keep my farm high. I want to make sure that I dodge out on his E's. It's very important that we dodge out on Swain's E's. I actually opted in for Doran's Ring because I felt a bit more comfortable with that in this lane. And as you can see, I'm just using my abilities onto the Swain, onto the minions. And right now, when the Swain has no E, I can actually look to trade a little bit back. My goal is not to poke him out of the lane. He's extremely tanky. But my goal is rather to just make sure that I trade a little bit onto him, get my first strike, and just get my gold going. I'm slowly just getting the creeps right here. He walks up, I get my first stack. Nothing too big, but definitely good start of the lane. I'm going to be catching these minions in the tower. Make sure that I try to avoid getting hit by his E. It's very important that I keep dodging those. It's a little Swain specific thing. As long as you don't get hit by his E in lane, you're usually actually doing pretty well, because his E is is a very crucial part to his kit. And I'm fine just letting the wave push into me, and Poppy senses a window, goes for the gank. We get Swain to very low, and this is amazing for my lane, because right now I can just chill, I can push the wave, collect my farm, Swain TP back, and I want to reset on 1100 gold, so that's 500 more gold. So in the meantime, I'm going to be using Fog of War, getting my stacks, getting my first strike, comboing with my first strike, and we don't lose any mana because of me hitting my passive onto the Swain, so it regenerates my mana. So it's beautiful like this. I'm not under a lot of threat by Graves. Graves actually does not have the most amount of gank threat. Neither does Swain. Swain's setup is very limited. Once again, I Fog Bolt right here. This makes Swain scared. Swain then actually walks in, and I can hit him with another combo. Not the cleanest combo, but it kind of does its job. I sadly get hooked by his E, so he can trade back onto me. So preferably I hit my stun and I avoid this trade, but the ID still stands. Right now, I'm just going to be collecting all this farm. I'm going to be collecting this next wave as well, and then I'll make sure to get my reset into a perfect base onto Lost Chapter. So stuff is going amazing. I TP back mid, and right now Swain has no TP, so he's actually under a bit of threat. So that's perfect for me. I can now abuse this by taking wave control, pushing the pace of the lane a little bit, pushing the minions, so he has to answer to these minions. And I can just then take my stacks when he tries to farm under tower. I gotta be a bit careful, of course, not too much, but I gotta be a bit careful of Graves. I'm gonna be taking a plate because Swain has to take a bad reset. He's gonna miss a wave. I'm in a beautiful position right now. Graves ganks bot, and what I want to do right now is I actually want to hard shot mid to pressure bot. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm using my E on the wave, and that actually backfires because Swain comes back, he hits an E onto me, and because I have no E right now, he can actually just chase me down like this. So this eventually blows my flash. It's not really ideal. So what was the main mistake here? I rushed my E. I should have just been a bit more patient and just lasted these other creeps with my auto attacks and with my other abilities, and just keep the RE from him using this, because this is definitely something I want to avoid. Especially me losing flash right now, it's very bad now. I have to play very careful. So I actually opted in for tier this game. In hindsight, I would like probably not really go tier again. I think it just takes too long to scale up, but it's not too bad regardless. I come back to lane, I make sure that I keep my farm high. Once again, I shove in the wave, he's answering. I abuse Fog of War, beautiful stuff, and I get my first upgrade at level 7. It's amazing. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing right now. I warded top side because Graves is most likely going to be on Herald. That means I'm leaning bot side. I'm not under that much of gank threat. I'm going to be pushing and pressuring him a little bit through that. Once again, I'm fogging towards bot because enemy bot lane is very far up. I play together with my Poppy, and we can see if we have a nice gank window right here, which we do. We get a nice stun, and that's a kill for our Zeri. Beautiful stuff. What do we see in our composition? We see that with Zeri, Sona, we have Xindra. Our scaling is amazing. So if we can maybe get our bot lane rolling, that would be great, because our top laner is getting second tier tower dove, so it's not looking too hot on top. So it can definitely be good to maybe get a win condition going on bot side, because it's going to be quite hard to carry a game on our own. Not the biggest fan of this E, because it wasn't angled correctly, and right now he actually gets a bit of prio onto the wave. So I think I should have held onto that right here. But overall, I'm just scaling up right now. I'm chilling. I actually see a beautiful TP window on bot lane. This is also a thing that you can definitely do on Xindra. Whenever you see an angle like this, we can go for a gank like this because of how good that our setup is with our ult and with our E. So I don't have the time to base. I hold my E. Beautiful stuff. And we get another kill onto our AD carry. Oh, it's actually on me. Even better, because I'm going to carry this one, right? So I base, I get a few of my items. Sadly, don't have Mythic just yet, but that's completely fine. Since I got some kills, I can therefore take my Sorks. I'm keeping up in farm pretty nicely, but 9 CS per minute. So we're just scaling. We're actually in a pretty good position. Top lane is getting destroyed, but we're a bit down on gold, but I'm doing pretty well. So I'm feeling pretty confident in the game state right here. So we sadly mis-execute a gank onto this Swain. Swain's got mercs. Poppy kind of goes a bit too deep. And that's pretty rough because that way I lose flash and Swain gets a kill. We changed up the lane assignments because bot lane tower fell. I'm trying to see if I can maybe make a pick right here. Because sometimes enemies get greedy and they take another wave right here. That way I can like punish them, get them to half health, get a lot of gold with first strike, and get a passive stack, of course. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm not really looking to kill someone because I don't have ult. But since they don't show up, I can just clear the wave. And I want to base real soon on my mythic power spike. So what's going to happen right now is I'm going to stay one more wave. But Swain actually shows up, and that allows me to get a combo onto him, get some first strike gold, and actually reset on my mythic right now. And I see a play going on, so I can instantly respond with my TP. A bit of luck onto this timing, but it works out really well for me. And enemies are overcommitted. I get a beautiful stun off here. into a beautiful kill. So this is starting to look pretty big for us, because I reached my mythic power spike. I'm getting a few random kills here and there. I'm making sure to keep up my farm high. So the game is just looking generally quite alright right now, even though that we are behind in some towers. It's just looking fine. So once again, Aphelios is kind of far up right here. So I go out of fog, look for this combo. I waste Lulu flash ult, so this is amazing for me. And right now my goal is to just value my own life, keep my farm high, and get to my next power spike. Next item spike is going to be massive. So once again, I use fog, get this guaranteed stun, get a lot of first try gold. It gives me like 50 gold every time I do this, so that's amazing. And I get a stack and I pressure the enemies. Poppy actually comes for a gank. Swain is really low. I follow up because he has mercs. It's actually really hard to kill him, but eventually we do get the kill right here. Beautiful stuff. I keep on farming. I get my Needlessly. Needlessly is also pretty big. Gives me 60 AP, so that's amazing. And in this game, actually, Darkseal is kind of solid. And the reason why Darkseal is kind of solid in this game, let's see if we press tab somewhere. Not necessarily, but what do we see in the enemy composition? We see Aatrox, we see Graves, we see Swain, we see Aphelios, we see Lulu. They have very low threat, very low dive threat. So I'm pretty sure that I can just stay alive with my Darkseal and peel them off with my E, value my life that way, and actually stack up more AP. So Darkseal is actually quite solid in this game. Let's take a look at what's going on right now. There's an objective fight right here. We're a bit late as a team. Sona had to reset. And that leads us to get into a pretty awkward position. So why was this awkward? Well, we're running into the enemies as Syndra. Yes, I get a AOK stun, but it's not going to be enough because it's just not really what my champion does, but also not what my team comp does. So that leads to our team dying and us getting actually in a pretty awkward position. Little bit more skirmishing, nothing too big. So right now, my next goal is to get my next item, which is the Seraph's Embrace right here. So now I'm down to fight. Now I'm down to make something happen. I try to make a vision play right here, but I kind of fail. Also, the Rift Herald spotted me. So let's get this Rift Herald and make sure that these guys cannot do Baron. We're here pretty much on time. We've got a lot of poke, so it's very hard for them to play. And now it's very important that we take a look at my ability usage, because if we have correct ability usage in situations like this, it's going to be the turning point for us to actually start winning these kind of skirmishes. We hit our item spikes. Right now it's just important that we actually do what we need to do on our champion. So I think I kind of fumbled the football right here. And this is where I could have carried the game, but I didn't. I miss a lot of my abilities. This is not really the less is more mindset. I think I rush my E right here. The enemies dodge it out very nicely. They also dodge Aurelia R. And I also miss my slow. So we're just not getting a whole lot right here. And once again, I think I kind of rush my abilities right here. Yes, I stunned the Aatrox. I missed the Aphelios. And right now I cannot follow up. Imagine if I can follow up onto this Aphelios with my stun when Poppy does this. It would have been a massive, massive difference. So I rush my abilities, and that leads to us actually getting into a worse position than we should be in. We still win the fight because the enemies also blew a lot of their cooldowns. But I made a few mistakes when it came to my ability usage that would have even more turned the fight in our favor and maybe would have been able to do Baron at that point. So the enemies kind of get out. We get into a long chase. And it's not looking that good. They kill our Sona, and we overstep our welcome right here, which leads to us getting double TP'd on and eventually losing Baron. So this is a really, really, really bad position for us to be in. It's we're very far down in gold. We just died. We lost our stacks on our item. We lost AP. And the game is now slowly spiraling out of control. So, does this mean that the game is over? Not at all. We still have enough things that we can do as Xindra. We just gotta play it a bit more smart. So right here, I try to kill Aatrox. He flashes my ability, so that doesn't really work. And right now it's just making sure that you don't die, keep clearing waves, and look for picks. That's basically what I'm trying to do as Xindra right now. So right here I'm trying to abuse the vision that we just obtained. I hit Lulu, but Grace is onto me. But Zeri actually can pop off. But she goes a bit deep. A bit too deep. I'm pretty sure if she played it a bit slower, it would actually be a pretty good fight because Grace was really low. Grace was their main carry. But nevertheless, it is what it is. I make sure to value my life. I stay very, very far away, and I'll just be looking for these E's. And we still got the vision control, so I let the enemies walk into me. I get this beautiful pick onto Lulu, and this is the stuff that you want to be doing as Xindra in general. Just let the enemies come into you, abuse the vision, look for these E's, and you'll be rock and rolling right then. So let's take a look at the rest of our ability usage right here. I think I kind of rush my E again. I'm not patient enough. I'm not letting the enemies like really overstep or get into me. And because my E is on a 10-second cooldown right now, this guy can just E in and fuck us up. So another mistake by me. And it's been mainly about rushing my abilities and E usage. It's just too rushed. And if I do that stuff correctly, I actually am in a way more commanding position in the game because I'm actually quite strong as a champion. So I have to make something happen right now. And when I look at the map state, at this state in the game, I see Aatrox pushing top. Our team is getting pressured everywhere, so I have to make a pick. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to be stacking my Qs in advance right here in the bush, so Aatrox does not see them. And once he comes in, I go for the one shot with, I mean, it's kind of broken, but it works, you know. With the execute, and this allows us to get a massive tempo play, so we can actually defend the rest of this Baron. Sadly, our AD carry died, but it's okay. I once again use Fog to get this E and get this beautiful stun, and that's a trend that we see right now in this game, right? If I use it from Fog of War, enemies are not anticipating it, they're just dying to it like flies. But if I just use it in front of them and I'm rushing it, they're anticipating it, they're dodging it, they're holding their abilities for it. And that way it just gets on the cooldown and it gives them the timer to actually abuse it. Let's continue. So in this case, little skirmish on top side. I ult Graves in advance. I E him afterwards to get the guaranteed stun, and it means we get a massive shutdown onto him. The rest of our team sadly dies. I look for a little outplay onto the Aatrox, but that cost me my flash. Not really worth. But I'm getting a bit desperate right here. Let's take a look at this E right here. How do I use my E? I think I'll once again rush my E. I'm getting a bit too impatient. And that leads to us losing this tower. Let's take a look at the other E. I'm using another E. Yeah, once again, I could have set it up way better. I could have picked up a ball with my W right here. And then place a Q right here, a W right there, and then E, and then he will guaranteed get stunned. Not that it would have mattered because we had no follow-up, but the ID behind it would have definitely been there. We get a few kills up on the back end. Pretty good stuff. We can possibly get back into the game right now. These kills are really, really big. And right now, I actually miss another E. So what happens here is I QE the Graves, and right now I have no abilities to continue the assault onto him. So that's pretty rough because he can chunk me very, very hard right now, and he can actually close us in. So imagine if I held my E right there and just not rush it. Or I QR and then E him so he gets guaranteed stunned. Would have been way better. I'm just rushing my abilities. I'm getting impatient. Once again, I rush my E. He dodges the rest of my abilities and he kills me. And this is practically end of review right here. Because from this point, they just run us down and they just kill us in the base and get the Nexus. So what are the key learnings from this review? I think actually that the laning phase was quite alright. We had a very good first reset. So lane was pretty good stuff. Pretty slow lane. We had a good first reset. Wave management was pretty on point. We valued our life. I think valuing our life was also pretty solid in this game. The main problem why I could not carry this game was my E usage. E usage and getting impatient in these standoff skirmishes. And what's going to happen if we miss those E's in those situations is we actually give the enemies opportunities to take control of a certain area, to push us out, and therefore we actually have to walk back into them to regain it, and it makes it very, very hard to get these fights in a good position consistently. So because of my E usage, I lost out on a lot of opportunities and on a lot of kills, and therefore objectives, and therefore we eventually did not, or like weren't able to close this game out. So that's it for this review. I thank you all for watching the guide. I had a blast making it together with Curtis, and we'll see you guys real soon with another guide. If you guys have any questions, let us know in the comments and we'll happily get back to you.